Chapter 219. After expressing his goodwill, Barry Diller asked about the results of the discussion between Eric and Murdoch. Eric didn't hide anything and revealed to Barry Diller that Firefly would invest in Fox Network. Barry Diller's reaction after hearing the results was similar to that of Jeffrey and Robert. After repeatedly confirming that Eric was telling the truth, Barry Diller's expression changed several times. In the end, he patted Eric's shoulder silently and walked away with a lonely expression. Eric could also understand Barry Diller's feelings. Fox Network had been under construction since 1986. In just 4 years, it had developed into the fourth largest wireless television station in North America. Barry Diller had contributed greatly to this. But even so, Barry Diller only had less than 5% of Fox's management shares, while Eric could obtain 10% of Fox Network shares just by relying on a TV series. It would be strange if Barry Diller felt good about it. However, Eric didn't have the slightest intention of standing up for Barry Diller. This world had always been unfair. The one who gave the most was not the one who got the most in many cases. After shuttling through the crowd and dealing with a few people who greeted him or struck up a conversation, Eric finally found Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston was chatting with Nicole excitedly. "Jenny, what are you talking about? You look so happy." Eric greeted Nicole with his eyes, then hugged Jennifer Aniston's waist and kissed Jennifer Aniston gently on the cheek. Eric made such an intimate gesture in public. Jennifer Aniston shrunk her neck shyly and rebuked, "We're talking about girls' topics. Why are you asking about this?" "Heh, I'm most interested in girls' topics. Tell me quickly," Eric teased. His hand on Jennifer Aniston's waist pinched her through the thin dress, causing Jennifer Aniston to grumble again. Nicole smiled as she watched Eric and Jennifer Aniston being intimate. She was a little jealous. Eric looked up at this time, as if he felt that Nicole was idle. He said casually, "Nicole, I'm a little hungry. Can you get me some food?" Nicole nodded subconsciously. Perhaps it was because she had developed some habits during her time as a maid in Eric's house. After she reacted, she only hesitated for a moment before walking to the table not far away with a smile. Jennifer Aniston saw Eric's rude behavior toward Nicole as if she was a servant. She broke free from Eric's arms unhappily. "Eric, how can you be like this? Hey, Nicole, wait for me. Don't listen to this guy. Let him starve to death." Jennifer Aniston shouted as she chased after Nicole. Eric was stunned. They hadn't seen each other for an hour. How did they become best friends? Didn't Jennifer Aniston always dislike the female leads in her movies? "Silly girl, you're so sincere after a little coaxing. Eric, dump her as soon as possible. If she continues to develop, even if you have your IQ as a foundation, with her genes neutralizing it, you might become mentally retarded." Eric followed the voice and pressed his hand on Drew's short hair. He rubbed it a few times. "You're very hard-working in school. You even use such a high-end word like genes." The girl squeaked a few times. She knew that Eric was being sarcastic. She protested unhappily. "It's night now. I didn't skip class." Eric grabbed the girl's little ear and scolded, "From the girls' school in Pasadena northeast of Los Angeles to Malibu, you have to pass through the entire city, a distance of more than 50 kilometers. With the road conditions in Los Angeles, you might not be able to get here even if you drove for 2 hours. Tell me, if you didn't skip class, when did you start to rush here?" Drew could only tilt her head slightly because Eric was pulling her ear, but her little mouth refused to admit defeat. Who would be so stupid as to walk through the city? Don't you know there are things like highways? It takes less than an hour to go from Pasadena to Highway 101 and then to Mulholland Boulevard. Ouch. Ouch. As Eric exerted a little force, the girl immediately closed her mouth. Her eyes became watery after a few blinks, and she looked at Eric pleadingly. The people around them curiously sized up the commotion. Some people who didn't know the situation asked their companions a few questions. Then, they looked at Eric with a somewhat strange gaze. Jennifer Aniston, who was about to walk over with Nicole, saw Eric pulling Drew's ear. She immediately snorted and pulled Nicole. "Nicole, let's go. Let's just starve him to death. Nicole hesitated for a moment. She gave Eric, who had already seen her and Jennifer Aniston, a helpless look. Then, she turned around and left with Jennifer Aniston. Eric was about to continue lecturing the girl, but someone who stood up for Eric's child abuse bravely appeared. "Hey, Eric, how can you treat a girl so rudely?" Elizabeth, who walked over with Julia, raised her eyebrows. She slapped away Eric's hand and pulled Drew to her side. The girl hid behind Elizabeth and stuck her tongue out at Eric playfully. Eric didn't know if Elizabeth really didn't know the situation or if she was playing dumb. However, since someone had interfered, he couldn't continue lecturing the girl. "Liz, what's the matter?" Elizabeth thought that Eric would defend himself, but when she heard him say that, she could only say, "Julia is leaving. Aren't you going to send her off?" Julia, who was standing behind Elizabeth, didn't expect the girl to say that. She quickly tugged at Elizabeth's dress. Eric glanced at Julia. Seeing that Julia was avoiding his gaze, he knew that Elizabeth was acting on her own. However, he still nodded readily. "Okay." Then, seeing that the girl was about to slip away, Eric glared at her and said, "Don't run, follow me." "Julia, it's not even 10 o'clock yet. Why are you going back so early?" Eric asked as they walked to the parking lot outside the mansion. Julia opened her mouth hesitantly. Julia isn't feeling well today. Why are you asking so clearly?" Seeing the girl's awkward expression, Elizabeth immediately helped her out. Eric nodded in understanding, but this action made Julia's face turn slightly red. When they arrived at the parking lot, Eric said, "Julia, can you do me a favor?" "Huh?" Julia looked at Eric strangely. Eric pulled over the girl, who was playing with her fingers out of boredom behind the three of them. "Let Drew stay at your place for the night. Help me send her to school tomorrow. Is that okay?" "No, I'm not going," the little girl immediately cried out. Seeing Eric's unquestionable gaze, she could only nod her head, feeling wronged. She also understood that Eric might be bringing Jennifer Aniston home tonight. It was unlikely that he would let her cause trouble. Seeing the girl get into the passenger seat of Julia's car, Eric was still worried. He said a few words to Julia before letting them leave. After Julia drove the girl out of the manor, Eric didn't return to the mansion. Instead, he sat down on a bench in the small garden nearby. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment before she also walked over and sat down next to Eric. When she saw Eric take out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and light it up, Elizabeth opened her mouth slightly. She realized that they were outside, so she didn't stop him. Eric lit the cigarette and took a deep puff. He exhaled light green smoke before he turned his head and asked, "Liz, what's the matter? Are you troubled?" Elizabeth didn't answer. Instead, she asked a question. Seeing Eric's confused expression, Elizabeth added with a teasing look, "You have to deal with so many women. Is that why you're hiding here to smoke?" Eric smiled. "How is that possible? I don't have many women. Besides, movies and women are my two biggest pursuits in life. I can't wait to enjoy them. Why would I be troubled?" This was the first time Elizabeth had heard such a straightforward point of view. She rolled her eyes and said, "Your pursuits are really vulgar." Eric ignored Elizabeth's accusation. He held the cigarette and slowly enjoyed the cool sea breeze under the dim street lights, intending to stay quietly for a while. He originally thought that Elizabeth wouldn't be able to stand the silence and would leave. However, after he finished the cigarette, the girl was still sitting next to him, which made Eric feel a little uncomfortable. This woman is inexplicably staying here. What does she want? After pondering for a while, Eric asked tentatively, "Liz, your father forced you to be my assistant director, right? Should I talk to Mr. Murdoch and let it go?" "Do you hate me?" Elizabeth asked again. Eric shook his head. "I've never hated beautiful women." When Elizabeth heard Eric's words, her heartbeat inexplicably sped up a little, but her mouth was still unforgiving. "You really don't forget to be glib all the time. You really are a playboy." Hearing this comment, Eric turned his head and leaned lazily on the back of the bench. He unscrupulously admired the girl's graceful body wrapped in the dress and revealed a teasing smirk. "Then why don't you run away as far as you can?" Under Eric's invasive gaze, the girl almost subconsciously wanted to cover her front, but in the end, she suppressed this impulse and refused to admit defeat. "You narcissist, why should I run away?" Eric glanced at the girl's feet, which were originally overlapped easily, but now firmly planted on the ground. He didn't say anything more. He took out another cigarette and lit it up. He sorted out the various things that had happened tonight and glanced around in boredom. Chapter 220. Eric saw through her guilty little action, and Elisabeth's face finally became slightly hot. However, the woman seemed to treat this confrontation as a war. She, who had always been very competitive, sat there stubbornly, as if she would lose something if she stood up. However, seeing that Eric did not care about her at all, the woman became angry again. "Hey, what are you thinking about?" Eric did not even look at her. He pointed at the landscape lamp on the lawn not far away. "The lampshades over there are very beautiful. I'm thinking that when you can't stand it anymore and leave, I'll remove a few of them and stuff them in the trunk of the car." Elisabeth could not help but burst out laughing. However, her little face soon tensed up and she glared at Eric. "Don't even think about it. I'll keep an eye on you." "That's a pity." Eric sighed, but there was no hint of regret in his tone. "I say, can you be more serious?" Elisabeth finally felt a little helpless. Eric put out the cigarette in his hand and threw it into the trash can next to him. Then he said, "Okay, Liz, what's the matter? Can you just say it?" Elisabeth paused. "What I want to say is, don't forget to give me a salary." Eric was puzzled. "Huh? About you being the director's assistant. Although my father asked me to do it, you can't expect me to do it for free. I want to achieve financial independence as soon as possible. That way, my old man won't be able to threaten me with freezing my credit cards." Eric smiled. "Do you really want to be the director's assistant? Liz, we both know your father's purpose, but neither of us has that intention, so stop fooling around, okay? Although you don't have any classes, I suggest you go back to school and enjoy your last year of school. Once you leave, you won't be able to find that feeling again in this life. My business is none of your business." The woman retorted unhappily. Then she said, "I already have my own plans for my future. I plan to be a film producer, so first, I have to familiarize myself with this aspect." "Oh, what about News Corporation? Didn't you study media to inherit your father's career?" Hearing Eric's question, Elisabeth couldn't help but feel a little sad. Although Dad didn't say it clearly, I still know that he wants my little brother to take over. Your father is very traditional." Eric didn't expect Murdoch to have a preference for boys. This made Eric feel a little familiar. "He's more like a stubborn old man," Elisabeth muttered unhappily. Then she said to Eric, "Actually, there's one more thing." Eric realized that Elisabeth was talking about serious business this time. He nodded gently and motioned for the girl to continue. "I've discussed it with Julia. Maybe next year. After I've accumulated some experience, I plan to try to produce my first movie. She promised me to be the female lead. And then... So, what I'm saying is, can you sell us a script?" Eric didn't answer immediately. He took out the cigarette box again. This time, Elisabeth couldn't stand it anymore. She snatched the cigarette from Eric's hand and threw it directly into the trash can. "Hey, don't you realize that it's rude to smoke in front of a lady?" Okay, I won't smoke." Eric raised his right hand, then asked, "Let's not talk about the script first. If you make a movie, where will the funds come from? Didn't you just say that you want to be financially independent? With your status as a rookie, even if Julia is the female lead, it's probably difficult to get investors, right? These are two different things. I've thought about it. I'll borrow 10 million from my old man to set up a film company. This money is enough to make a movie." Julia also agreed to use her salary to invest. In the end, I'll get a percentage of the profits." Elizabeth said it matter-of-factly, as if she was used to this kind of thing. Eric thought for a moment and understood. This was a common way for billionaires to pass on their family wealth and avoid high inheritance taxes. In the name of a loan, they would give their children a sum of money to help them establish and develop their own companies. When their children's companies developed to a certain size, they would buy back the money at a high price through mergers and acquisitions. This method allowed the rich to pass on their wealth to the next generation at the lowest price possible. Of course, this method of inheritance also had high requirements for the ability of the children. If the next generation couldn't make up for it, it would be difficult to work. Although Murdoch didn't intend to let Elizabeth take over, he wouldn't refuse to pass on his wealth if Elizabeth asked. As Eric was thinking, Elizabeth suddenly interrupted his thoughts and asked, "Eric, what are you thinking about? Do you agree or not?" "Agree to what?" Eric asked subconsciously. Then, he remembered and showed a curious expression. He smiled and asked, "The script." "Then, how much are you going to pay for one of my scripts?" When this question came out, Elizabeth was really stumped. None of the movie scripts that Eric personally wrote had a box office result of less than $100 million. Almost every one of them could bring in no less than $50 million in profit for the investors. Based on this standard, even if it was calculated according to the price of a Hollywood gold medal screenwriter, it would definitely not be enough. "Look, you haven't thought about anything yet, so let's wait until you think about it," Eric said and stood up. As long as Elizabeth didn't have a problem understanding, she would definitely know that he was rejecting her. In fact, it wasn't just a matter of money. Eric didn't know how many scripts he had in mind. It wouldn't be a big deal even if he gave one to Elizabeth. But now he couldn't. Although several movies had achieved box office success in a row, his strength in Hollywood still hadn't stabilized. If he gave a script to the other party, and he couldn't maintain a dominant position to check the quality of the movie at all times, if he messed it up, it would destroy the invincible aura that he had built through several movies. Obviously, although Elizabeth persuaded Julia, it was not enough to make Eric believe that the two girls would succeed. "Hey, Eric, wait." Elizabeth quickly stopped Eric, who was about to get up. Although she didn't know Eric's concerns, after thinking for a moment, she temporarily cut off the idea of getting a script from Eric because she realized that she couldn't afford this price at all. However, the girl was quite smart and quickly thought of another idea. "Eric, how about this? I won't take the script from you. Julia and I will pick the script ourselves, but when the time comes, you can help us check if the script has the potential to be a hit. Is that okay?" Chapter 221. Eric refused without thinking. "That's even more impossible, Liz. Even if it's the same script, different people will produce two completely different styles in the end. That's why I said it has potential, but the director you found is not good enough. In the end, it will affect my reputation." Elizabeth grabbed Eric's collar and said, "Then we'll invest together, and you can be the producer, right? That way you can personally check the quality of the film. If I release the news that I want to co-produce a movie, let alone those second and third tier companies, even the big 7 companies will cry and scream. The conditions they offer will definitely be much better than yours. Come on, give me a reason to cooperate with you." "You..." Elizabeth was speechless. She glared at Eric for a moment before she gritted her teeth and said, "You ungentlemanly bastard. Wow, you're angry out of humiliation." Eric smiled and stood up. Suddenly, he used his hand to support himself on the back of the bench and moved closer to the girl. When he saw the girl shrink back reflexively, he said softly, "So, girl, since your father doesn't want you to inherit the family business, then don't torture yourself. Enjoy the life of a rich family's daughter and then find a man to marry. How great would that be?" Because of their recent contact, Elizabeth was not completely indifferent to Eric. At this time, when she saw him suddenly so close to her, she could even clearly feel the faint but not repulsive smell of cigarettes on Eric's body. She was not mentally prepared, and her mind was suddenly in a mess. All kinds of thoughts were buzzing in her head, and her cheeks were unconsciously smeared with a layer of blush. Under the soft light of the Manor Street lamps, the girl's appearance appeared more delicate and the atmosphere between the two began to drift. It was unknown if he was affected by this emotion, but Eric, who originally didn't have any beautiful thoughts, couldn't help but lower his body again. Elizabeth, who did not expect Eric to suddenly do this, instantly widened her eyes. She wanted to push Eric away, but she felt a stimulating electric current flowing everywhere. Her body was so weak that she could not even lift a finger. Feeling the girl's lips tremble like the wings of a startled butterfly, Eric realized that he had lost control of himself. But since he had already done it, Eric saw that the girl did not resist and continued. After a while, the two figures on the bench under the street lamp finally separated. When their eyes met, Eric felt a little awkward and said, "Sorry, Liz, I didn't mean it." In just a few seconds, Elizabeth felt as if she had drifted to an unknown place. Her vision was completely occupied by Eric's face. She could only feel his movements and the rough touch of his fingertips. This feeling... All right, it was indeed not bad. Then, he seemed to have said something. She felt a little dizzy, and the speed at which her brain cells processed information became extremely slow. Oh, he said he didn't do it on purpose. After a while, she finally understood what Eric meant. It wasn't intentional. The girl reacted and blinked her eyes quickly a few times, as if to confirm whether she had heard wrongly. Of course, she didn't hear wrong. How could he say that? He was too shameless. In an instant, the little flame that rose in the girl's heart was like an electric spark that ignited an engine. The physical strength that was originally scattered began to quickly gather. Taking advantage of the fact that Eric had not completely retreated, Elizabeth looked around. She did not find anything suitable, so she instinctively raised her leg and unceremoniously kicked at Eric with her sharp high heels. Ah! Amidst the painful cry, the girl's face was taut as she quickly walked away without looking back. When the two security guards in the manor followed the sound, they only saw Eric sitting on the bench by the garden. He rolled up his trousers and quickly rubbed his calf. The two of them quickly recognized Eric's identity. They put their batons back and asked, "Mr. Williams, what happened just now?" Eric awkwardly smiled and shook his head. "It's nothing, I just accidentally touched it." One of the security guards glanced at the obvious bruise on Eric's leg and asked with concern, "Mr. Williams, do you want me to help you inside to rest?" No, there's no need. I'll rest for a while and go back by myself." The older security guard felt that Eric might not want others to find out about his embarrassing incident, but he also saw the injury on Eric's leg, so he said, "Mr. Williams, we have a first aid kit in the lounge. Do you need it?" "Oh, thank you." Eric quickly nodded and smiled gratefully at the security guard. On the other side, Elizabeth did not go back to the party hall. Instead, she returned to her bedroom. She took off her evening gown and went into the bathroom to take a shower. The girl's mood was still not calm. Although she had just kicked Eric's calf, the anger in her heart had mostly dissipated after walking from the garden to her bedroom. Now, she was worried about her gains and losses. She restlessly turned around a few times, threw a few pillows, and took many deep breaths, but it still didn't have much effect. She laid on the bed and covered her head with a pillow. She whimpered a few times to vent her anger and was silent for a moment. Then, she grabbed the phone on the table, held it in her arms, and dialed a series of numbers. Julia, who had just entered the city, heard the mobile phone ring. She parked the car on the side of the road and pressed the answer button to her ear. Then, Julia heard a little girl's aggrieved voice. "Julia, he kissed me." Julia didn't have to use her brain to understand who Elizabeth was referring to. Although Julia had been like a little quail in front of Eric because of the drunken confession incident, her personality didn't change. When she heard this, Julia seemed to have expected it. Not only was she not jealous, but she also teased, "Liz, I just asked you to talk to him about the script. You're really going all out. So, he kissed you. Did you agree?" Elizabeth said in a depressed tone, "No." Then, the woman roughly explained what had happened. Of course, many details had to be omitted. Julia patiently listened to the girl on the other side of the phone and comforted her softly before hanging up the phone. Julia started the car and went on the road again. She glanced at Drew, who was listening in the front passenger seat with a curious look on his face. She curled her lips and complained, "That little daddy of yours is really despicable. He raped Liz, but he won't even give us a script." Chapter 222. The girl could tell that Julia was just envious of Eric's love for her when she called him little daddy. However, some incomparably evil thoughts flashed through the little girl's mind. Maybe I can use it somewhere else. I don't believe he won't go berserk. With that in mind, Drew asked, "Why did you buy the script from Eric?" Julia didn't care and casually told her about Elizabeth's plan. The girl suddenly became interested. She sat up slightly and said, "Why didn't you ask me?" Julia glanced at Drew suspiciously. "Ask you?" The girl said proudly, "Yeah, let me tell you, Eric likes to write and draw in his study, so he has some good script outlines in his study." Julia opened her mouth in surprise. "You're not going to steal, right? How is that possible?" The girl retorted subconsciously. Then she chuckled and said, "Actually, if I take out an outline, Eric won't know at all." Julia immediately shook her head and refused. "No, even if Eric doesn't know at the beginning, he will definitely find out in the future." "Forget it then." Drew shrugged her small shoulders, looking indifferent. She didn't believe that Julia wouldn't be tempted, so she leaned back in her chair, lowered her head, and pretended to trim her fingernails with a small file in boredom, waiting for Julia to speak again. Sure enough, after the car drove on the road for a few more minutes, Julia finally couldn't help but say, "Drew, you mean Eric has a lot of spare script outlines?" The little girl gently nodded her head, trying her best to hide her triumphant smile. "Eric dotes on you so much. Can't you tell him to sell us one? Anyway, he has so many." Because in the call just now, Elizabeth's focus was on Eric forcing a kiss on her, she didn't explain in detail to Julia why Eric rejected her. Therefore, the woman felt that perhaps she could try again through the little girl. However, Drew directly broke Julia's fantasy. Since Eric has already rejected Miss Murdoch, he must have a good reason, so even if I tell him, he won't change his mind. Julia was silent again. It wasn't that she didn't want Drew to steal Eric's script, but she really didn't dare. She couldn't imagine how Eric would react if he found out, but the result would definitely not be a laughing matter. "Actually, Eric isn't the only one in the world who can write a script, right?" Drew said after a while. Julia stopped the car at a red light, turned her head, and asked, "What do you mean?" "I mean we can find the script ourselves, and then I'll let Eric see if it has potential," Drew said quickly. Some of the girl's ideas were in line with Elizabeth's. But this time, Julia keenly caught something else from the girl's words. She wondered, "You just said we?" "Yes." Drew no longer concealed his purpose. "Julia, look, since Elizabeth Murdoch wants to set up a film company, why don't the two of us participate? The three of us will be producers. I'll be in charge of the script, you'll be the female lead, and Elizabeth will be the distributor. What do you think?" When Julia heard this suggestion, she was both moved and a little surprised. She looked at the girl in front of her who looked 17 or 18 years old but was actually only 14 years old. Among the women who had a close relationship with Eric, Julia was the one who had the least contact with Drew. Therefore, she knew the girl the least. Hearing the honking of the car behind her, Julia realized that the green light in front of her had turned green. She quickly stepped on the accelerator and asked, "Will Eric agree to this?" "We won't tell him." Then what about the money? Where did you get the money to invest in the film company?" Drew immediately took out a VIP card from his bag and waved it in front of Julia. "There's still more than 10 million in this card." Because she didn't know that Eric had asked Drew to acquire the adaptation rights, Julia suddenly felt unreal when the girl said the balance in the credit card. She felt that Eric's pampering of this girl was unreasonable. He actually gave her so much money. Although she had become a top Hollywood actress with Pretty Woman, to be honest, because she had only been famous for a short period of time, her assets were less than 10 million. Julia was greatly surprised, and the girl's goal was achieved. After taking back the credit card, Drew immediately said, "As for the shares, I don't want much. Just give me 30%. You two can discuss how to divide the rest. Don't think it's a lot. Think about it, I can let Eric help us choose the script. This is worth 30%. After all, if the script isn't chosen correctly, it's equivalent to a person going down the wrong path from the beginning. Even if they work hard later, they are destined to achieve nothing. Moreover, Elizabeth's family owns 20th Century Fox, so distribution is definitely not a problem. But there will definitely be a lot of problems when making the movie. At that time, if Eric knows that I have shares in it, since it has become an established fact, he can't just stand by and watch, right? Seeing Julia nodding, shaking her head, and looking thoughtful, the girl, who was talking enthusiastically, quickly realized that this matter was probably completely led by Elizabeth, and Julia was just going with the flow. Realizing this, the girl no longer wasted her breath and suggested, "Julia, why don't we call Elizabeth Murdoch to come over and discuss this matter together?" Julia raised her hand and looked at her watch. "Isn't it too late now?" "Hey, sister, time is money." Drew took Julia's mobile phone from behind the windshield and asked, "Give me the phone number, I'll talk to Elizabeth." Julia pointed to the front helplessly. "The address book is there." Drew took the address book in front of him and began to flip through it. More than an hour later, Elizabeth arrived at Julia's apartment. One wanted to surpass Eric, and the other wanted to surprise Eric. After some communication, Elizabeth and Drew hit it off. The ambitious girl and the ambitious girl began to gather around the small coffee table in the living room of Julia's apartment and began to discuss their plans to set up a film company. As for Julia, she had completely degenerated into a small role of serving tea and water. Eric, of course, didn't know this. The two security guards brought him a first aid kit, and after he applied medicine, he rested for a while before carefully returning to the party. The pain in his leg made Eric not want to stay any longer. Plus, Friends was still in the process of production, so many people began to leave in order not to delay tomorrow's work. Eric found Jennifer Aniston and planned to go back to Beverly Hills together. "I'm going to Nicole's place." Jennifer Aniston held the tall girl next to her and said, "Also, I don't want to disturb my dad all the time, so I plan to move out from his place tomorrow." Nicole agreed to share the apartment with me. Eric was stunned for a while before he confirmed that he didn't hear wrong. He looked at Nicole, who was standing next to Jennifer Aniston with an innocent look on her face. Eric thought to himself, is this the legendary trap of one's own making? Because of the popularity of Friends, Jennifer Aniston was once again the target of the paparazzi, so she couldn't live in her small apartment in Burbank anymore. Jennifer Aniston didn't want to move to Eric's place to stay with Drew. She could only temporarily move to her father's place before she found a safe place to live. Then what should I do? Eric spread out his hands and asked helplessly. When Jennifer Aniston heard this question, she hesitated for a moment, but she quickly raised her chin and said, "I don't care what you do. I still have to film tomorrow, so I'll go back with Nicole first. You can go back to Beverly Hills by yourself." Until Jennifer Aniston left with Nicole, Eric was still a little confused. He only asked Nicole to coax Jennifer Aniston to prevent her from having a conflict with Drew. He didn't expect the final result to be like this. He didn't believe that Nicole did this on purpose, because it didn't seem to be beneficial to her. However, he absolutely didn't believe that Jennifer Aniston was a simple-minded Jennifer Aniston. In the end, it could only be said that the difference between Jennifer Aniston and Nicole was too big. In order to protect the female lead, Nicole tried her best to coax Jennifer Aniston into a happy mood. In the end, she directly destroyed Jennifer Aniston's defense, and this girl began to pour her heart out. However, Eric was also certain that Nicole wouldn't dare do anything to hurt Jennifer Aniston, so he decided to let it be. After going through so many things in one night, Eric was a little tired. He didn't even have the energy to drive home, so he went straight to Virginia's small villa to rest for the night. The next morning, Julia got up in a daze, grabbed her hair, and went to the bathroom to brush her teeth and wash her face. However, when her mouth was full of foam, the girl suddenly remembered that there should be two other people in the house. After cleaning up, Julia walked to the living room. At this time, the living room was a mess. The A4 paper she bought to print the script was scattered everywhere, and there were a lot of messy drawings on it. Elizabeth and Drew were still huddled together, discussing something enthusiastically. Julia picked up a piece of A4 paper and looked at it. She didn't understand what was drawn on it, so she casually asked, "You didn't sleep at all last night?" This voice finally made the two girls raise their heads. Drew shook his head left and right and said in surprise, "Oh, it's already morning." Julia rolled her eyes. "Wasn't this obvious?" The girl yawned loudly and said to Elizabeth, "Liz, let's stop here. I'm going to sleep." After saying that, the girl unceremoniously went to Julia's bedroom. She was definitely going to sleep in Julia's bedroom. Julia wasn't a neat freak, so she only asked, "Drew, Eric asked me to take you to school. Hashtag at yen%, hashtag at." A few mumbling sounds came from the bedroom. It sounded like the girl was covering her head with something. Julia looked at Elizabeth blankly. "What did she say?" Elizabeth quickly wrote on a piece of paper with a ballpoint pen and said casually, "She said there's no need. She already took leave." Julia looked in the direction of the bedroom, then looked at Elizabeth and said in surprise, "Wow, that's amazing. How did you know?" "I didn't understand either. I guessed." Just as Julia was speechless, Elizabeth picked up a piece of paper and gestured to the girl, "Julia, look, what do you think of the name of our film company?" "What does this mean?" Julia looked at the two unknown letters on the paper. "TG Film Company?" "TG, it's three girls," Elizabeth replied. "You guys didn't sleep the whole night. Don't tell me this is the name you came up with?" "Of course not. We also discussed a lot of things." "Oh yeah, Drew said he wants 30% of the shares. He'll give you 30% of the remaining shares and I'll take 40%. What do you think?" In her previous life, Julia was one of the first Hollywood movie stars to set up their own production company. However, the actress had only been famous for half a year, and her focus was still on the movie. Hence, Julia nodded in agreement as soon as Elizabeth mentioned it. "All right, you guys do as you see fit. Do you want breakfast? I'll make it." "No need, I'm going to sleep too." After saying that, Elizabeth stood up and wobbled into the bedroom. Julia, who was worried, followed her into the bedroom. She saw that Elizabeth and Drew had fallen asleep, each occupying one side of the bed. Julia closed the curtains and thoughtfully covered the two of them with a blanket. Only then did she start to clean up the messy living room. In this chaotic morning, she was half asleep and half awake. That was how the famous TG Film Company was born. Chapter 223. On the second day of the celebration party for Friends, Murdoch couldn't wait to use News Corporation's media to announce that Firefly would invest in Fox. At the same time, he also said that not only would Friends continue to be broadcast on Fox, but the two sides would also cooperate more closely. As soon as the news came out, most of the media, who were originally pessimistic about whether Fox could keep Friends under the covetous eyes of the three major TV stations, immediately had a 180-degree change in attitude. They began to express their optimism about the development prospects of Fox. Not to mention that Murdoch revealed that Firefly would cooperate more closely with Fox, just based on the fact that Fox retained the hit series Friends. As long as Fox could seize the opportunity to produce more sophisticated TV programs to cultivate loyal audiences, then its position in the North American television industry would be unshakable. After a few years of dedicated development, it was not impossible for it to surpass the original three major TV stations. Affected by this good news, the market value of Fox, which was originally less than $1 billion, rose rapidly. The transfer of shares in a television network could not be completed overnight. After Fox released the news, not only did the three major TV stations not give up on Friends, but they also contacted Eric more frequently. Because of the merger with the Metropolitan Broadcasting Company in 1985, ABC, which was the most eager to turn the situation around, even offered to become a shareholder. However, Tom Murphy, the CEO of ABC, was only authorized by the board of directors to transfer 3% of the shares. Although the value of this 3% of shares was more than twice the value of Fox's 10% shares, Eric was not tempted at all. Because with this 3% of shares, ABC would continue to lose money until it was acquired by Disney, and it would not receive any dividends for the next few years. Instead, it would consume a large amount of Firefly's funds. Moreover, this 3% of shares could not give Eric much say. Therefore, between the thriving Fox and the deeply troubled ABC, anyone with a slightly normal IQ would know what choice to make. On the evening of September 10th, with the laughter of the audience of Friends and the close attention of other television companies, Friends ushered in its second week of broadcast. 2 hours later, Nielsen released the viewership statistics. The third and fourth episodes of Friends had an average viewership of 24.6 million, with a peak viewership of 29 million. When the three major TV stations saw this data, they began to analyze the factors that contributed to the success of Friends. In the end, they discovered that other than the humorous plot and lines, the most important reason for the high viewership ratings was that the first 2 episodes were personally directed by Eric. Of course, there might have been movie directors who had turned to TV series production in the past, but it was definitely because those movie directors were in an early stage of their careers. When they really had no other choice and were at the peak of their fame, no movie director would be willing to degrade themselves to make a TV series. Therefore, Eric, who had achieved great success in his previous movies, would personally direct a TV series. This gimmick aroused the strong curiosity of the audience. They wanted to see what kind of TV series Eric, who had achieved a series of box office miracles, would make. The quality of Friends itself had also met the expectations of the audience. Therefore, the combination of these factors led to the popularity of this sitcom. Understanding this, the three major TV stations began to make their moves almost at the same time. For a time, Steven Spielberg, Francis Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Tim Burton, and other big Hollywood directors received high-priced offers. The three major TV stations even offered to pay millions of yuan as long as they could put their names in some episodes. Under the powerful attack of money, although most directors refused due to various scruples, it was not that no one tried. The results were very good. Some TV series with the name of a big Hollywood director exceeded the ratings expectations. Therefore, in the next few years, inviting famous movie directors to direct the first 1 or 2 episodes of a TV series quickly became a trend. When a TV series was broadcast, if there was no famous Hollywood director in the promotion, the audience would subconsciously feel that the TV series was not of high quality, and the ratings would not be very good. Of course, these were all things that happened later. After the broadcast of Friends in the second week, people found that the news about Friends had almost completely disappeared from TV programs other than Fox. Even the hosts of entertainment talk shows that like to joke about current events seemed to have never heard of Friends. Obviously, this was the three major TV stations' way of expressing their attitude towards Eric's continuous rejection. However, this ban could no longer cause any harm to Friends. Don't forget, Fox was backed by News Corporation. They could promote this TV series from print media to TV media. Although the three major TV stations controlled most of the TV media in North America, they were still pure TV networks and had not been merged by media companies. Therefore, they had little involvement in newspapers and magazines. In this era, newspapers and magazines also played a major role in the spread of a TV series. Although Fox's competitors did not forget to publish some attacks on Friends in newspapers that they could influence, such as saying that Friends had too many adult topics and was not suitable for broadcast on public TV, it did not cause much of an impact. This was because the more important newspapers maintained a positive attitude towards Friends. Eric was sitting in his office reading a news article about Friends, published by the Los Angeles Times. According to Nielsen data analysts, the second week of Friends has eliminated about 70% of the unstable audience. In the end, the average number of viewers of this sitcom will remain around 22 million. There is no doubt that it will be the TV series ratings king this year. According to the news, Friends has an average advertising revenue of $3 million per episode. Therefore, this TV series will bring in more than $70 million in revenue. Although we don't know the specific sharing plan between Firefly and Fox, with Eric Williams's strong style, the advertising share of Friends will definitely reach the highest level in the industry. Based on this calculation, the first run of this TV series by Fox will bring Firefly nearly $30 million in revenue. What is even more surprising is that the copyright of Friends is exclusively owned by Firefly. Then, the subsequent transfer of broadcasting rights and video distribution of this sitcom will bring in more than 3 times the advertising revenue of the first run. However, the total investment of this sitcom is less than $5 million. Eric Williams, the brat who stirred up storms in Hollywood, proved to the world that not only could he shine in movies, but he could also do well in TV series. When writing this article, the author had been wondering if Eric Williams' next step would be to extend his tentacles into the field of music, because in several of his movies, Eric Williams' name was clearly hanging in the soundtrack column. The encounter on the bus in Dark War, Speechless Love, made countless movie fans intoxicated. The scene of Tom Cruise and Brooke leaning against each other was also called the most beautiful movie scene of the year by the media because of the contrast of this soundtrack. CEOs of major record companies, look at the 3 major TV stations now in a sorry state. Why don't you take the initiative to invite Eric Williams before others do? After reading the article, Eric thought for a moment. When he was shooting Pretty Woman, because he remembered a song by the famous pop band Roxette, Eric had the idea of training singers and getting involved in the recording industry. The 1990s was the last glorious era of the world's recording industry. As long as a record company had a few leading singers, its profits were no less than those of a film company or TV station. Even if the recording industry completely declined due to the rise of the internet era, the copyright of songs owned by the record company was still a huge fortune that could bring long-term income in the West, where intellectual property protection was very strict. After writing a few strokes on the memo beside him, Eric was about to flip through the next newspaper when there was a knock on the office door. "Mr. Williams, Miss Murdoch is here." Eric responded casually. Elizabeth Murdoch, wearing a blue and white checkered shirt and dark jeans, and carrying a dark blue lady's bag, rushed in and sat down across from Eric. She still looked casual, as if Eric's kiss that night had no effect on her at all. Taking off her bag and putting it on her lap, Elizabeth glanced at the title of the Los Angeles Times in front of Eric and curled her lips in disdain. "I didn't expect you to be so narcissistic as to secretly hide in the office and read other people's articles praising you." Eric didn't care about the sarcasm in the girl's tone. If he was just a film director, of course, he could ignore the outside world and just make a good movie. But he was also the chairman of a film company, and it was necessary to keep enough attention to the news in the industry. Because he was too busy during this time, Eric could only ask his assistant to help him sort out some of the more important news. Every day, before he came to the company to deal with business, he hurriedly read some of it. Chapter 224. Eric put the pile of newspapers aside, crossed his arms, and looked at the woman across from him. In this era, whether it was on TV or in real life, it seemed that women liked to wear shirts. Of course, Eric also liked women dressed like this. It gave a woman a different temperament. At least, he felt that this look was much better than the women in the future who wrapped themselves in messy clothes. In fact, in Eric's opinion, shirts were also a kind of uniform, especially when women wore men's shirts. It was best to bare their long legs. When Elizabeth saw Eric staring at her, she quickly put away her carefree look. She put her arms on the desk in front of her and glared at Eric with dissatisfaction. "Hey, what are you looking at? Why do you look so naughty?" "Nothing. I was just thinking, are you going to wear this to work?" Although the girl looked good in this outfit, it was obviously not what a woman who was going to work should wear. "Of course, I'm going to be your assistant, not an office girl. Do you want me to wear a suit and high heels and run around the set with you?" Eric glanced at the woman's slightly raised chin and knew that it was useless to say more. He shook his head gently and did not force her. In any case, he did not expect the woman to be of much help to him. As long as she could pass him something as a mouthpiece during filming, it was fine as long as she did not cause trouble. "Up to you," Eric said. He lowered his head and rummaged through the drawer next to him. Elizabeth seemed to have won a small victory. She softly snorted with a nasal sound. Eric found a document and a pen and pushed it to Elizabeth. "This is the contract. Sign it, and then you'll be a member of the cast of Sleepless in Seattle." Elizabeth took it and did not rush to sign it. Instead, she read it carefully. Eric looked at his watch and did not care. He picked up the newspaper next to him and continued reading. After a while, Eric, who was reading the newspaper seriously, heard the woman opposite him say, "Eric, I've signed it. What should I do next?" Eric put the copy Elizabeth handed over into a folder and said to the woman, "You can go back now. When the crew leaves for Seattle in a few days, someone will inform you." "Ah." Elizabeth opened her mouth slightly and quickly realized that Eric did not take her seriously at all. She immediately said angrily, "How can you do this? I protest. If you don't assign me work, I'll stay in your office today." Eric cursed. If he had known this would happen, he would not have agreed to Murdoch's request. Just as he was agonizing over how to coax the young mistress away, someone knocked on the office door again. Alan poked his head in to take a look and said, "Mr. Williams, the scriptwriters are all here. They are waiting in the conference room." "Well, I'll be right there." Eric nodded. After Alan left, he said to Elizabeth, "Liz, you really don't need to be here, so you'd better go back. Someone will inform you when the time comes. I'm not leaving. Since I've signed the contract, you should assign work to me." Eric was a little annoyed. He quickly rubbed his right thumb on the side of his index finger and pointed to the coffee machine next to him. "Since you want to work, make me a cup of coffee first." The woman immediately refused. "I'm not your servant. This is the duty of a director's assistant. If you don't want to, go home and wait for the crew's notice." "You." Elizabeth glared at Eric unwillingly. After a while, she put a cup of coffee in front of Eric with a sullen face. Of course, Eric was not in the mood to drink coffee. Looking at Elizabeth's stubborn look, he picked up the phone and pressed a few buttons. "Alan, print 2 copies of the confidentiality contract you signed and send them over." Elizabeth's expression changed. Hiding the slyness in her eyes, she lowered her head slightly and stood aside obediently. After a while, Alan sent in 2 copies of the confidentiality contract. "This is the confidentiality contract Alan signed. You don't have to read it if it's too long. As Mr. Murdoch's daughter, I think you probably know what the content is. If you violate it, not only will you have to pay a huge penalty, but you may even go to jail. After signing it, you can stay with me during the shooting of Sleepless in Seattle, and temporarily act as a secretary assistant to help Alan with some work." This time, the woman did not waste any more time. It took her less than a minute to flip through more than 10 pages of the contract and sign her name. "Okay, come with me. At least for the next few days in Los Angeles, you're not allowed to wear this set of clothes again." "I see." The woman did not refute this time and happily followed Eric to the conference room. There were 8 people sitting in the conference room at this time, 6 men and 2 women, all in their 20s or 30s. This was the scriptwriter team that Eric had specially found for the next TV series. Fox TV had signed a preliminary letter of intent for the transfer of shares with Firefly these days, and the specific transaction would be completed within this month. Therefore, before Eric produced the last 2 movies of the year, he also began to prepare for a TV series and a variety show that he had promised Murdoch. In the plan, the variety show would be broadcast in the spring, but the variety show that Eric planned to take out was relatively simple to plan, so there was no rush to produce it. The other TV series would be broadcast in the fall of next year. Although Eric was personally at the helm, after hearing that the average production cost of this TV series was as high as US $2 million per episode, Fox still proposed to use the model of filming and broadcasting at the same time out of caution. However, Eric did not agree, not only because he was very confident in this TV series, but also because of the subject matter. If they used the model of filming and broadcasting at the same time, the quality of the series would definitely be affected because of the rush of production. Originally, neither side was willing to give in. Eric even said that if Fox did not want to take the risk, Firefly could invest in the production alone, but the copyright would not be divided equally. Even Barry Diller did not dare to agree to this proposal. Who could guarantee that this TV series would not be as popular as Friends? The 2 sides were in a deadlock for a few days, and in the end, Murdoch personally made the decision. Since Eric was so confident, Fox, with its big business, did not dare to take the risk. Even if the final results were not good, they would only lose more than 20 million. Even if Fox suddenly got Friends this year, they would definitely lose tens of millions of dollars in the year-end financial report. Eric wanted to produce the TV series that Fox had produced in the 1990s, The X-Files. In Eric's memory, this was almost the only TV series that Fox had produced in the 1990s. However, the ratings for the first few seasons of the US TV series were not good. If it were not for the support of a group of die-hard fans, the TV series would have been axed in the first season, which caused the ratings of the TV series to exceed the ratings of the first episode. Although the first 3 seasons of The X-Files had the most unique style, in terms of ratings, it was the 4th and 5th seasons that reached the peak of ratings. In Eric's opinion, the main reason why the ratings for the first 3 seasons did not increase was that the story did not have a main storyline. Although there would be a novel monster or supernatural event in every episode, the lack of a main storyline made it difficult for the audience to pay attention to the show. The writer, Chris Carter, did not connect the clues revealed in the first 3 seasons until the 4th season and began to tell the readers a complete sci-fi story. At first, Fox did not think highly of The X-Files, because although North American TV stations had tried to produce sci-fi shows, there were not many successful ones. Therefore, Eric felt that perhaps the writer of The X-Files, Chris Carter, who was known as the father of The X-Files, did not come up with a complete main storyline for The X-Files. It was probably because of the years that the story became clear. Before he decided to produce this TV series, Eric had asked someone to look for Chris Carter and wanted him to lead the scriptwriter of this TV series. After all, many of the ideas in his previous life were conceived by Chris Carter. Chris Carter was not an unknown person. He was now working as a scriptwriter for Disney. However, when Eric sent someone to contact him, Chris Carter said that he was not interested in sci-fi TV series, so he was not willing to accept the job. This made Eric see the power of the butterfly effect again. The father of The X-Files, in his previous life, was not interested in sci-fi TV series. It was really amazing. In the conference room, Eric pointed at the end of the table and asked Elizabeth to sit down. Then, he went to the head of the table and greeted everyone. After the self-introduction, Eric stood up and walked to the wall with the writing board hanging on it. He picked up a black pen and quickly wrote a few words on the wall, The X-Files. Everyone here is very good at writing sci-fi TV series, so you must have realized that I am going to produce an American sci-fi TV series. The name of this TV series is The X-Files. Under everyone's curious gaze, Eric put down the black pen in his hand and gently clapped his hands. Then, I will briefly introduce the background of this sci-fi TV series in my mind. The story almost starts from the origin of life. The universe is huge, so big that we dare not imagine it. Then, in this boundless universe, there were also infinite possibilities. Among the billions of stars, Earth is definitely not the only planet that can produce intelligent life. The Bretians are the originators of this whole story. Chapter 225. Mr. Williams, may I ask what the meaning of Bret is? As soon as Eric finished speaking, Elizabeth, who was sitting at the end of the desk, raised her small hand and asked, her eyes flashing with a faint mischievous look. Eric glared at the girl. Liz, you tell me first, what does Coruscant in Star Wars or Cybertron in Transformers mean? How would I know? Elizabeth rolled her eyes as if it was a matter of course. Then shut up. Eric did not intend to give this delicate lady any face. It was fine to make a few casual jokes in private, but doing so during work had already touched Eric's bottom line. If you interrupt again, I'll get someone to kick you out. Elizabeth wanted to retort with a "you dare," but seeing Eric's already darkened face, the girl did not say anything in the end. She just lowered her head and gently stuck out her tongue. Eric coughed lightly, attracting the attention of the group of writers who were curiously looking between him and Elizabeth. Okay, let's continue. In the vast universe, a planet called Bret gave birth to the intelligent Bretians. After hundreds of millions of years of technological accumulation, the Bretians mastered the technology of space travel. This made the Bretians a very powerful force in the universe. However, with the passage of time, Not only was the planet they relied on to survive on the verge of destruction, but the Bretians themselves were also on the verge of extinction due to a long period of natural evolution. As Eric spoke till here, he saw Elizabeth, who was sitting at the end of the desk, raise her small hand again. But this time, the girl was smart and did not speak directly. Instead, she stared at Eric with a pair of curious big eyes. The narration was interrupted again. Eric's face darkened and he thought for a moment before squeezing out a word, "Speak." At the same time, he swore in his heart that if the girl continued to cause trouble like before, he would directly kick her out. "Mr. Williams, according to Darwin's theory of evolution, isn't life more advanced as it evolves? Why do you say that the Bretians were on the verge of extinction due to natural evolution?" Eric sorted out the information in his mind and replied, "Darwin's theory of evolution only covered the shortest period of the evolution of life. What I'm referring to is the development of a species at the genetic level. Birth, development, prosperity, and decline. These were the irresistible laws of the universe. Even the largest galaxies and the smallest atoms could not escape this law. If you read more books, you will find that the genes of a species do not always evolve in a good direction. After a certain degree of development, the genetic sequence will begin to decline and disintegrate. There was a saying in the scientific community that the human Y chromosome had begun to degenerate. Perhaps in a few million years, there would only be women left on Earth. Well, if there are still humans on Earth by then." Amidst the chuckles of the others, Eric solemnly warned, "All right, Liz, this is the last time. From now on, no matter what doubts you have, either endure it or leave." After the girl reluctantly nodded her head, Eric continued, "All right, let's continue from where we left off. When they were on the brink of extinction, the Bretians, in order to ensure the continuation of their species, formulated a very grand plan to colonize an alien planet. They used the technology they had mastered to create a very advanced spaceship. At the same time, they compressed their own life force into a kind of black liquid that had its own consciousness." Eric quickly wrote a key word on the blackboard. This black liquid that carried the life force of the Bretians was called black oil. The spaceship carried the remnants of the Bretians and the black oil and began to fly across the boundless universe. When they encountered a planet suitable for life, they would stop and use the Bretians' genes as a blueprint to guide the emergence of life on the planet. Until a suitable species appeared, the black oil would begin to activate. Through infection, it would invade the body of the species. After a series of genetic modifications, the original species would disappear and a new species, the complete form of the Bretians, would appear. In this way, the Bretians completed the continuation of their own species in the universe. With Eric's explanation, more and more key words appeared on the blackboard, and a tree diagram was gradually built. The scriptwriter in the office was also immersed in Eric's novel and grand sci-fi background. Even the restless Y. Lisabeth was listening with great interest. Then, the time came to 7 billion years ago. The alien spaceship of the Bretians finally arrived on Earth. They began to guide the evolution of the species on Earth again and again. In order to create a new species suitable for colonization, the Bretians did not hesitate to destroy the original species again and again. 440 million years ago, 85% of the species went extinct. 195 million years ago, 76% of the sea creatures disappeared. 65 million years ago, the age of the dinosaurs ended. These are just the mass extinction events that we humans are aware of within the scope of scientific knowledge. Following the recent extinction of the dinosaurs, mammals began to flourish. After a long wait of 7 billion years, the Bretians finally found a species suitable for colonization by black oil, humans. But originally, humans did not have any survival advantages in nature. In order to ensure that humans could reproduce as much as possible, the Bretians began to catalyze the process of human civilization. Thus, humans learned to use tools, learned to communicate, learned a variety of skills, and even the emergence of various religions, all of which were guided by the Bretians. And the final colonization date set by the Bretians for black oil was December 21, 2012. On that day, the hidden black oil would launch an invasion, destroy the human race, and replace it with the form of the Bretians on Earth, the little gray man Eric had prepared a typical alien photo and attached it to the blackboard with a magnet. During the Second World War, because of the rise of the power of space control, humans finally realized that we were not alone in this universe. In 1945, at the end of the Second World War, the U.S. military was lucky enough to shoot down a spaceship in the Pacific Ocean near Japan. During the secret salvage process, black oil was discovered. Then came 1947, the famous Roswell crash incident. The federal government not only recovered the alien spaceship, but also obtained the alien's corpse. Through a series of studies on the data of the alien spaceship, the possibility of alien colonization was also discovered. In order to prevent the colonization of the Bredians, the government secretly formed an organization in an attempt to research a way to resist the colonization of the Bredians. But during the research process, the scientists in this organization desperately discovered that black oil's colonization was irresistible. So, in order to ensure that they and their families could survive after December 21, 2012, most of the people in the secret organization betrayed the human race and sought refuge with the aliens. They forced the aliens to agree to their terms through nuclear destruction. And after the colonization, they would continue to live as hybrids of aliens and humans. This organization was known as the Syndicate. After writing the word syndicate at the end of the tree diagram, Eric turned around. Okay, next, the story of our science fiction drama will officially begin. Our protagonist, Fox Muller's father, William Muller, was originally a member of the Syndicate. But because he firmly opposed the idea of seeking refuge with the aliens, he left the Syndicate. However, the aliens kidnapped William Muller's youngest daughter, Samantha Muller. When he was a child, Fox Muller happened to see this scene. When he grew up, through deep hypnosis, he recalled the situation at that time. So, Fox Muller began to have a strong curiosity about supernatural phenomena, and never gave up on finding his sister. After graduating from the psychology department of Oxford University, Fox Muller joined the FBI and immediately transferred to a group that specialized in supernatural phenomena, the X-Files group. However, this group only consisted of him at one time. Until a few years later, his partner, Dana Scarlett, appeared, and they began their own adventure. After Eric finished telling the background of the story, a scriptwriter sitting down and listening asked, "Mr. Williams, you want us to write a story where the male and female protagonists, Fox Muller and Dana Scarlett, are in the process of searching for Muller's sister, discover the betrayal of the Syndicate, and destroy the Bredians' colonization plot, and save all of humanity." It turned out that the American scriptwriters of this era had already begun to show signs of saving all of humanity. Eric thought to himself and asked, "You're Peter Krikos, right?" The Caucasian man in his 30s who had just spoken nodded and said, "Yes, Mr. Williams. I once participated in the scriptwriter of Star Trek." Eric did not think highly of him just because he had participated in the famous Star Trek series. Although they were both sci-fi shows, Star Trek and X-Files were completely different styles. "Peter, if it's just like what you just said, then I can complete the script by myself. You don't have to sit here." When Peter Krikos heard Eric say this, he smiled awkwardly and did not refute. With Eric's fame, he indeed had the confidence and qualifications to say such words. Since this TV series is called X-Files, then the story will definitely revolve around the protagonist's investigation of a series of supernatural phenomena. The style will be mainly horror and suspense. So in my plan, there will be 24 supernatural and supernatural events in the 24 episodes of the first season. Peter Krikos asked again, "If that's the case, won't this sci-fi show become a sci-fi detective show? Then what about the background of the Bretians that you just described? This is why I asked you to come. What you have to do is to link these isolated supernatural phenomena together with the Bretians' colonization and the Syndicate's conspiracy to form a complete story that seems scattered but is actually intricately linked." After Eric finished speaking, he turned around and wrote another word on the writing board. He continued, "Based on this clue, I came up with a subtitle for the first stage of this TV series: Puzzle. This stage may last for about 3 seasons. Through 3 seasons of adventures, the protagonist will collect a series of clues and integrate them, outlining the background of the story I just described, and then begin the next stage of the story." Chapter 226. Seeing that everyone was still a little confused, Eric said, "Actually, I already have a lot of ideas for this story. After the meeting, I'll have someone give it to you for your reference. At the same time, I'll give you some hints. Muller's ultimate goal is to find clues about his sister's disappearance, and even find her in the end. Through deep hypnosis, he discovered that his sister's disappearance was related to alien abduction. Thus, he recorded and categorized the supernatural phenomena he encountered. Muller used his professional habits to pick out the information that might be useful. Like a child's jigsaw puzzle, he pieced them together to form a complete clue that pointed to the Brettian colonization conspiracy. You can add a plot of Muller's notes in every episode. The idea of the subtitle Jigsaw Puzzle was something that Eric came up with on the spot. In the original version, Dana Scarlett was the one who often recorded the supernatural phenomena they encountered. However, in the episodes that Eric had watched, he didn't find any special reason for Scarlett's notes. Since that was the case, Eric felt that this idea was best used on the male lead. Moreover, the plot of the jigsaw puzzle could also arouse the speculation and curiosity of the fans. This kind of suspense setting had always been a great way to attract popularity in American TV series. This time, after Eric finished speaking, the scriptwriters didn't raise any more concerns. After all, they were the best sci-fi scriptwriters that Fox and Firefly had found. If Eric not only gave a rough background, but also his own plot ideas as a reference, these 8 people wouldn't be worthy of their names if they still couldn't write a script. After another half an hour of detailed discussion, Eric finally concluded, "Then, you have 2 months to come up with a script that I'm satisfied with. At the end of the year, Firefly and Fox will jointly produce a sample of the first episode. I hope everyone won't disappoint the audience." If there are no other questions, the meeting is adjourned. Everyone left one after another. Eric and Aaron discussed in whispers while quickly putting the information in front of them into a folder. When he looked up, he saw that Elizabeth was still sitting at the end of the long desk. Her right hand was supporting her chin as she looked at him curiously. "I'm going to CAA's headquarters. Are you coming?" Eric asked tentatively. Elizabeth reacted and looked at her watch. "It's already 11 o'clock. It's almost time for lunch. We'll have lunch there. If you don't want to go, you can go home." "I'll go," the girl replied reflexively, muttering in her heart, "Don't even think about getting rid of me." Like a little tail, she followed Eric into the car. Elizabeth sat beside Eric in the back seat. Even after the car had been on the road for a while, the girl still glanced at Eric from time to time. Her eyes did not hide her curiosity at all. Eric, who had been reading documents with his head lowered, was confused by her stare. He couldn't help but ask, "What are you trying to say?" "I'm just curious. How did you think of those things? The Brettians? The syndicates?" Eric closed the folder and placed it on his lap. He turned his head and stared into the girl's eyes. With a hint of mystery in his voice, he said, "Actually, I'm a person from the future who transmigrated from 2012. "Huh?" Elizabeth blinked a few times. She didn't react. Eric lowered his voice and moved closer to the girl. He continued, "Everything about the Brettians is true. After December 21, 2012, Black Oil launched an invasion. 99% of the human race was infected, and the remaining humans formed a resistance army. I'm one of them, but our resistance force is too weak. It's far from enough to fight against the Brettians. When the Brettians were about to wipe out the resistance, we used the Brettians' technology to invent the spacetime shuttle. My companions sent me to this era, hoping that I could destroy the other party's conspiracy before the Brettians launched their colonization. But I'm alone now. I can only rely on the X-Files to tell the people the truth. The Brettians must have sent a robot called T-800 to kill you, right?" The girl rolled her eyes at Eric and pushed him away. "Don't think that I haven't seen The Terminator." Amidst the chuckles of the driver and Alan in the front row, Eric spread his hands. "See, you don't believe me when I tell you the truth. Then don't ask so much." The girl was very dissatisfied with Eric's perfunctory attitude. "You're obviously talking nonsense." Eric shook his head and planned to continue reading the document. Elizabeth couldn't help but ask, "Hey, why are we going to CAA? You'll know when you get there. Don't mess around. Let me finish reading this document." Eric was too lazy to explain. He waved his hand and said. Elizabeth snorted angrily, but she didn't disturb Eric anymore. She turned her head to the other side. Eric. As soon as he walked into a reception room in the CAA building, a small figure rushed towards Eric. Eric picked up Stuart Runkle and spun him around. After putting him down, he rubbed the little guy's head and smiled. "You've grown a lot taller. You're still so tall." Standing in front of Eric, little Stu looked up at Eric from head to toe. "Eric, it looks like you won't grow any taller." Eric smiled and rubbed the little guy's head again. "Don't act like a little adult. An 8-year-old should act like an 8-year-old. What does an 8-year-old look like?" Little Stu asked in a weathered tone. He watched as Eric walked towards his parents. He shrugged and turned his head to look at the other people who came with Eric. When he saw the tall and beautiful Elizabeth, the little guy's eyes immediately lit up. He smiled innocently and said, "Hi, how are you?" Elizabeth felt that the little guy looked familiar. Now that she finally realized who he was, she rubbed Stuart's head with motherly instincts and said in surprise, "You're Kevin from Home Alone." "My name is Stuart Runkle. You can call me Stu." After the little guy introduced himself, he pretended to be innocent and said, "Miss, you're really pretty. Can I hug you?" "Of course." Elizabeth did not think much. She smiled and wanted to hug the little boy. After greeting Stuart's parents and the new agent named Brian Kurtzman, Eric turned his head and heard the little guy's innocent request for a hug. He smiled bitterly and reached out to take the little guy. "Stu, don't take advantage of girls. I haven't seen you for half a year. How did you become Xiao Lu?" The little guy struggled and got rid of Eric's big hand. "Eric, you're so stingy. I'm so young. I can't do anything. Even if she's your girl, you won't lose anything by hugging her. Let's talk about these things when you're 18. Now, do what you should do at your age." Stuart was about to refute, but Runkle's wife, who was worried that the little guy would annoy Eric, quickly came forward and dragged the little guy away with a smile. However, Elizabeth, who heard the short conversation between the two, was already in a daze. Was this really an 8-year-old child? No one in the reception room cared about the girl's thoughts. After a brief conversation, Eric led Alan, Charleston Runkle, and Stuart's new agent into a small conference room. Only Elizabeth, Runkle and his mother were left outside. The reception room quieted down. The little guy did not seem to notice what was happening around him. He ran to the sofa, took out a Rubik's Cube from a small school bag, and played with it by himself. Feeling a little bored, the girl walked over and sat down on the sofa. She picked up a magazine on the coffee table and casually flipped through it. Only Stuart's mother stood at the door of the small conference room and listened for a while. She wanted to push the door open and enter, but she did not dare to move. She could only walk back and forth in the open space in front of the small conference room. Elizabeth was reading the magazine when she heard the young child's voice again. "What's your name?" The girl looked up and saw the boy spinning the Rubik's Cube that was much bigger than his palm. "Are you asking me?" "You can call me Liz." "I'm not familiar with you. I'll call you Elizabeth." After the little guy said that, he opened his big pure eyes and continued to ask, "Miss Elizabeth, are you Eric's woman?" "No." The girl instinctively felt that she should not talk to the little guy anymore, but she had to answer the question. "I'm just his assistant." But just as she finished speaking, the girl heard a syllable with obvious disdain. "TSK. Little guy, what do you mean?" The girl could not help but put down the magazine in her hand and looked up at the little boy. Stuart told the truth. "I just think you're a little hypocritical." "I'm hypocritical?" The girl pointed to her nose in disbelief. "Why do you say I'm hypocritical?" The little guy shrugged. "Eric didn't let you go in with him just now, which means you're just an insignificant female assistant. Your salary is definitely not high. If you're not Eric's woman, then where did you get the money to buy such expensive things? Just your Chanel bag is not something you can afford with your salary. My family is 10 times richer than that bastard. The girl had completely forgotten Stuart's age. Like an angry kitten, she raised her voice and retorted. Oh. When the little guy heard this sentence, he dragged out a sound and nodded. I understand. Elizabeth sat back on the sofa, picked up the magazine and flipped through a few pages. She decided to ignore the little guy. But the little guy did not let her go. You like Eric, so you gave up being a rich girl and ran over to be his assistant, right? Hearing this sentence, the girl immediately threw the decision she had just made to the back of her mind. I don't like that bastard. The little guy sighed. Sigh, a woman who doesn't mean what she says. She even has the heart to lie to a child. You? The little guy was about to continue to tease the girl when Mrs. Runkle, who was already very annoyed, finally opened her mouth. Her voice was slightly sharp. Stu, shut up. Don't bully this young lady. Chapter 227. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind I Am Hollywood, and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type dread, and tell me secretly. Hearing his mother's reprimand, Stuart made a face at Elizabeth and lowered his head to play with the Rubik's Cube in his hand. After calming down, the woman realized that she was teased by the little guy in front of her. And she couldn't lose her temper at all. She couldn't lose her temper at an 8-year-old child. Elizabeth stared at the magazine in her hand for a while before she suddenly turned her gaze to the closed door of the small conference room. It's all that bastard's fault. The woman muttered silently and directly vented her anger on Eric. Eric in the conference room didn't know that he was inexplicably attacked again. At this time, he looked at Brian Kurtzman and Charleston Runkle sitting across from him with a blank expression. $10 million and 10% of the North American box office, Charlie. Is this what you want? After a moment of silence, Eric asked. It seemed that CAA didn't learn their lesson at all and asked for an exorbitant price again. In the previous negotiation between Cruise and Hanks, CAA only wanted to get a higher percentage of the profits. Although there was a difference between box office and profit, the final result was tens of millions of US dollars. Charleston Runkle glanced at Eric guiltily and didn't know what to say. Brian Kurtzman quickly said, Mr. Williams, Mr. Runkle has given me full authority for this negotiation. He's only here to listen. If you have any questions, you can ask me directly. Oh, that's good. Eric sneered and asked, if this negotiation fails, Mr. Kurtzman, will you be responsible for it? As soon as he said that, Charleston Runkle subconsciously looked at his agent with concern and vigilance. Obviously, Charleston Runkle also knew that this condition was somewhat unrealistic compared to the Hollywood salary rules. However, he was also very conflicted. On the one hand, Runkle certainly wanted to get such a generous salary and contract, but at the same time, he also knew that if he insisted on this condition, there was a high possibility that the negotiations would fall through. Eric saw Runkle's expression and suddenly felt relieved. As long as he didn't completely give the control of the negotiation to this new agent, everything would be fine. Eric didn't know why CAA replaced the original Horner Willie. He thought it might be because of the incident in the first half of the year. However, Eric didn't care about this. He knew Runkle's character very well. He was a mediocre middle-aged man who didn't have his own opinions, but he liked to control things that were beyond his ability. He was also used to worrying about personal gains and losses. Therefore, Eric knew that the main breakthrough point in this negotiation was Runkle. As for Brian Kurtzman, who looked much smarter and more capable than the original Horner Willie, wasn't there a saying that no matter how strong a fighter was, he couldn't afford to be dragged down by a useless teammate? Brian Kurtzman was also cursing Runkle in his heart. He had already discussed this with the middle-aged man in detail. He said that as long as the middle-aged man didn't interfere, he would definitely be able to get a very generous salary and contract for Stuart. Of course, he would also be able to get more commission for himself. Unfortunately, The couple refused to hand over the negotiation authority to him. At this time, Eric only tested the middle-aged man, and the incompetent middle-aged man exposed himself to him. Brian Kurtzman knew that if he allowed the middle-aged man to stay here, their negotiation with Eric would be even more passive. "Mr. Runkle, if you trust me, maybe you can wait outside." In order not to let Charleston Runkle disrupt his plan, Brian Kurtzman said to Runkle with a smile. Eric didn't seem to hear what Brian said to Runkle, nor did he try to dissuade him. Since he had already planted a seed of distrust in Runkle's heart, it would be strange if Charleston Runkle was willing to leave at this time. Sure enough, when Runkle heard Brian's suggestion, his fat body twisted a few times in the chair, but he didn't get up. Instead he said, "Brian, I'll stay here. You guys talk, I promise I won't interrupt." Brian Kurtzman's hand on the desk subconsciously clenched, but he still maintained a smile on his face. He ignored Charleston and said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, we all know that you signed a distribution contract with Fox, including the distribution rights of Home Alone 2. I think even if you are willing, Fox won't let this negotiation fail, right? Then you should know that Dark War, which has exceeded $200 million in box office, was originally distributed by Fox, but it was eventually taken by Columbia. So, I'll just make another film for Fox." Eric played with a pen in his hand and said in a relaxed tone. When Brian Kurtzman heard Eric's words, he hesitated for a moment before saying, "Fox definitely won't agree to let you change your film, because you can't produce a film that is as famous as Home Alone." When he heard Brian Kurtzman's tone, Eric felt relieved again. It seemed that CAA didn't know the specific content of the contract he signed with Fox. Fox's 3 film distribution contracts were originally for the sequel of Home Alone. Therefore, when they agreed to Eric's high terms, they also signed a series of strict conditions for this film. One of the conditions was that Eric had to continue using Stuart Runkle as the male lead of the sequel. Since CAA didn't know anything about this, Eric felt more at ease. "Even if Fox doesn't agree to change the film, I can still change the male lead. I'm sure countless families would be willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars for their children to star in the sequel of Home Alone, right?" After saying this, Eric looked at Runkle. He believed that Runkle and his wife would definitely resonate with his words. Although Stuart's salary and share in the first film of Home Alone wasn't high, because of the worldwide fame of Home Alone, Stuart signed a series of sky-high endorsements in the past year, which brought the couple tens of millions of dollars in income. "Charlie, I think most of Stu's endorsements are for a year, right? If the advertisers know that Stu won't star in the sequel, do you think you can still get tens of millions of dollars in endorsements from them next year?" "Mr. Williams, you keep talking about us. Why don't you talk about yourself? If the sequel of Home Alone falls through, Firefly might lose hundreds of millions of dollars, right? In comparison, our offer is very reasonable. After all, Stu is the only male lead in this film. He's unique." Eric shook his head. "If you insist on this whimsical offer, Firefly, as the payer of Stu's salary, will only be left with a 25% share. After deducting the production budget of the sequel, which could exceed $25 million, our final profit might not even be as much as Stu's, let alone hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Also, you're wrong, Brian. No one is unique in Hollywood. I can tell you that Firefly has a backup plan. If your offer is too high, we plan to immediately open the auditions for the small actors for the sequel of The Kid in Charge. Through the auditions, we can once again hype up the popularity of The Kid in Charge, and the final production budget may only be a fraction of US $25 million. Brian Kurtzman was about to refute, but Charleston Runkle, who was sitting next to him, couldn't help but interrupt. "Eric, it seems that you haven't said how much Firefly plans to pay Stu, right?" "Damn it!" Brian cursed. He had a strong urge to punch Runkle's fat face. $8 million. Eric gave a number, and then immediately added, "Charlie, you shouldn't focus on this small salary. Look at the long term. Many people can see that Stu's greater potential is in endorsement. As long as he can maintain enough popularity with Home Alone, then you can still get tens of millions of dollars in endorsement fees next year. With this, Stu can become the highest paid star in Hollywood. Whether it's Tom Cruise, Bruce Willis, or Julia Roberts, not only can they not get $8 million, but they also can't get a series of sky-high endorsements like Stu, because they have many competitors of the same age. Mr. Williams. Brian Kurtzman knocked on the table and wanted to interrupt. But Eric completely ignored him. He still stared at Charleston Runkle. So, if Firefly uses the backup plan I just mentioned, then there is no doubt that Stu's popularity will plummet next year. And although the sequel of Home Alone may bring a certain risk because of the change of lead actor, the chances of success are still very high. Once it succeeds, do you think those advertisers will choose the new lead actor of Home Alone to be their spokesperson, or Stu? Isn't it obvious? Think about it, Charlie. In order to insist on that unrealistic salary and contract, you gave up tens of millions of dollars of income. Oh no, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars of income. Because Home Alone will be filmed several times, either Stu will always be the male lead, or Firefly will continue with the audition plan and create a competitor for Stu every year. When Eric finished speaking in one breath, Charleston Runkle's forehead was already covered with fine beads of sweat, while Brian Kurtzman slumped in his chair. He knew that they had completely failed in this negotiation. Because Charleston Runkle was completely convinced by Eric, it was almost impossible for him to take back the initiative. What a good activity for a free lunch. Cool phones are waiting for you. Follow the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow Dread's official account now. Chapter 228. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind I Am Hollywood, and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. The door of the conference room was pushed open. Mrs. Runkle, who was standing at the door, looked at Charleston Runkle, who came out behind Eric. After receiving a slight nod from Runkle, Mrs. Runkle smiled happily. Mr. Williams, you are a very outstanding person. I hope we will have the opportunity to work together in the future. Now that the matter had been settled, Brian Kurtzman no longer regarded Eric as a negotiation opponent. He calmly and respectfully extended his hand to Eric. I think so, Eric smiled and shook hands with the other party. This agent's self-restraint was really admirable. If it was someone else, Charleston Runkle would have slammed the door and left in anger. But Brian Kurtzman did not stay for too long. After a few cold words with the Runkle couple, he found an excuse to leave. Eric felt that although Stu could bring a lot of income to this agent, Brian Kurtzman would definitely give up his position as Little Stu's agent. Working with an incompetent client who barely cooperated with him was probably unbearable for any outstanding agent. He looked at his watch. After more than half an hour of negotiation, it was just past 12 o'clock. Charlie, let's go for lunch together? Eric thought for a moment and said to the Runkle couple who were standing next to him and whispering to each other. Charleston Runkle looked up and saw that Eric still had an amiable expression on his face, vaguely resembling the high school boy next door. However, Charleston Runkle could no longer see Eric as the boy from back then. He estimated that it would be a long time before he could forget Eric's aggressive manner in the small conference room just now. No need, Eric. We still have things to do. Charleston refused. No, I want to go. When the little fellow heard his father's refusal, he immediately shouted in dissatisfaction. He wanted to rush to Eric's side, but he was tightly held back by Mrs. Runkle, who gave the little fellow a few warning glances. Eric knew that the estrangement caused by interests between the two sides was difficult to make up, so he did not invite her again. After comforting the little fellow for a while, he left with Elizabeth and others. In a restaurant near Century City, Alan and the driver consciously sat at another table, leaving only Eric and Elizabeth sitting opposite each other. After ordering, Elizabeth couldn't wait to ask, Eric, you finished talking so soon? How long do you think it will take? Eric asked. Elizabeth thought for a moment and said, I remember that last year, Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man were in talks for more than half a year, and it almost fell through in the end. And Dark War, You guys were also in a stalemate with CAA for a long time, right? Eric smiled. The situation this time is different. If I were to talk to CAA's agent, it might take a while, but I talked to Charleston Runkle directly. The girl nodded as if she understood and asked, how much is that little guy's salary this time? 8 million plus a 3% share of the North American box office. That's so high. That little pervert is getting off too easy, Elizabeth said bitterly. Eric thought that the girl must have been bullied by the little fellow when he was negotiating with Runkle. It's not high, and Stu is worth this price. If we were to talk to CAA, who has full control of the situation, the final price would definitely be higher. It's a pity that the couple is neither smart nor trusting, so they suffered in the end. You're so heartless. I remember they were your neighbors, right? The girl immediately changed her stance. Although Eric liked the smart little guy Stu, he didn't have any good feelings for Runkle and his wife. However, he was too lazy to take credit. The waiter served lunch and he lowered his head to eat in silence. Are you this busy every day? It was already 6 p.m. when Elizabeth asked this question. After a busy day, Eric returned to his office. He still needed to approve some documents regarding the merger between New Line and Firefly. At this time, there weren't many people in Firefly's office. Elizabeth didn't leave like the others. Instead, she stayed in Eric's office and looked around. Not really, it's just that there have been a lot of things recently, Eric replied without looking up. Oh, Elizabeth replied. She opened the window of the filing cabinet and took out a random document to read. It wasn't until 7 p.m. that Eric found Elizabeth still curled up on the sofa in his office. Everyone else is off work. Why are you still here? The girl saw that Eric seemed to have finished his work. She quickly stood up and put the book in her hand back on the shelf. I don't have anything to do at home. Besides, you have to finish what you started. Eric wanted to tease her, but seeing that the girl had been with him for the whole day and was quite obedient, he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. However, the girl obviously didn't appreciate it. You're definitely going to mock me, right? No, Eric denied. Let's go. After that, Eric took the lead and walked out. The girl caught up with him and said, You're definitely going to mock me. You're just going to say that I have nothing to do, right? Okay, I did have that thought, Eric replied helplessly. He said goodbye to the company's security and walked to the stairs. The girl showed an, I've been working all day and didn't even ask you for overtime pay. How can you think that of me? Apologize. I'm sorry. Eric was too lazy to argue with the girl. The girl pouted and said, You're not sincere. You should at least buy me dinner or something. I stayed with you until so late. Eric was looking for a place to eat dinner, so he nodded and said, Okay. Elizabeth suddenly became suspicious. You agreed so easily. You're not going to do anything to me, right? You're a typical woman. Eric was completely helpless. Although Elizabeth knew that if she kept asking, Eric wouldn't say anything good about her, she still couldn't help but ask, What do you mean? If you're far away, you'll complain. If you're close, you won't be inferior, Eric said in Chinese. Elizabeth paused for a second and quickly reacted. At the same time, she forgot about the topic and said with a little pride, That's Chinese. Don't think I can't tell. Our school has a lot of Chinese students. After the girl said that, she immediately said, Tian Wang should shout. I guarantee he'll drink until his waist is full. What do you think? Better than you, right? Eric rolled his eyes and thought that she was really good. It wasn't easy to say all the words in one sentence. He thought about it a few times before he realized what the girl was saying. Do you know what that means? Eric asked casually as they walked out of the office building. They say it's a code word, similar to Open Sesame. I know how to write it, but you don't know how to write it, right? Yeah, you're better than me, Eric said perfunctorily. When they arrived at the parking lot, Eric looked around and asked, Where's your car? I didn't drive today. The girl spread out her hands. Eric had no choice but to open his car door, then get in. After dinner, it was already past 8 p.m. when they left the restaurant. Eric looked at the girl who was still following behind him and asked, "How are you going back? Do you want to call your driver to pick you up?" The girl looked at Eric and said in disbelief, "How can you be so ungentlemanly? In this case, shouldn't you personally send me back?" "Please, Your Highness, your house is in Malibu. It takes 2 hours to come and go. You can't torture me like this. Forget it, I'll take a taxi back." The girl looked indifferent. She put her hands in her jeans pockets and paced a few steps on the road. She looked at the traffic on the street at night and said in a faint voice, "But recently, there have been several taxi robberies in Los Angeles. I heard that the victims are all young women. But don't worry, if something happens to me, my dad won't blame you. Get in." Eric squeezed out the words through gritted teeth. The girl smiled and opened the door like a nimble cat. She got into the front passenger seat. When she saw Eric sitting in the car with a depressed face, the girl laughed and said, "Okay, I lied to you. I've been staying at Julia's place for the past few days. Although it's not on the way, it won't take up too much of your time." Eric snorted and stepped on the gas. Not long after the car left, the girl suddenly pointed and said, "There's a movie theater in front. Let's watch a movie before going back. It's still so early. I haven't watched a movie in a long time." Eric parked the car on the side of the road. He didn't pull out the keys, nor did he have any intention of getting out of the car. He put his hands on the steering wheel and asked, "Liz, what do you want?" The girl saw Eric's impatient look and her lips moved. She waved her hand and said, "Forget it, I just suggested it on a whim. People like you are always so complicated. If you don't want to watch it, just send me back." Eric slapped the steering wheel and said, "See, it's just a movie." Not only did he want to watch a movie, but he also wanted to see what this girl was going to do tonight. "That's more like a gentleman." The girl quickly unbuckled her seat belt and got out of the car. Eric drove the car into the parking lot. After getting out of the car, he walked into the theater with Elizabeth. "It's my treat. What do you want to watch?" In the ticket hall, the girl generously took out her small wallet. Eric glanced at the posters in the theater. He pointed at one of them and said, "This one. When Harry Met Sally?" The girl leaned over to take a look at the slogan on the poster. "It looks quite interesting, I'll take it. A good activity of a pie falling from the sky. Cool mobile phone waiting for you. Follow the Chinese website, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow Dread's WeChat account now." Chapter 229. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind I Am Hollywood, and listen to your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add a friend on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and tell me secretly. After finding a seat, Elizabeth looked around and complained, "It's all your fault for choosing this movie. We still have to wait a few minutes." Eric stuffed the popcorn and Coke into the girl's hands and said, "You wanted to watch it on the spur of the moment. It's better to wait a few minutes than watch it halfway through. Besides, this movie is pretty good." "You've watched it?" the girl asked after hearing Eric's comment. Eric nodded. "Sort of." The girl rolled her eyes at him. "What do you mean, sort of?" "Yes means yes, no means no." Eric ignored the girl's rebuke. He couldn't say that he had watched it in his previous life, could he? Speaking of which, when this movie was first released, Eric had specially asked Nicole to watch it and figure out Meg Ryan's acting style. However, sitting here and thinking about it a few minutes before the movie started, Eric found something very interesting. The screenwriter of When Harry Met Sally was a female screenwriter named Nora Ephron. Although this female screenwriter and director had produced many very successful works, she was very little known. For fans, when her works were mentioned, they usually thought of the actors and actresses in the movie. No one knew that she was the director and screenwriter. Of course, this was not the most interesting part. What Eric found was that, at least in the works of Nora Ephron, the female protagonists all had a very common characteristic: sweetness. Meg Ryan received the title of America's Sweetheart because of Nora Ephron's When Harry Met Sally. In other works of Nora Ephron, the female protagonists were all given the sweet attribute. Other than Meg Ryan, the cold and elegant Nicole Kidman had become sweet because of The Pretty Witch. The ordinary-looking Lisa Kudrow had become sweet in Ghosts Inside, Outside. Even Meryl Streep had become sweet in one of Nora Ephron's early novels, Fire of the Heart. One's appearance was born from one's heart. This female screenwriter was probably a little woman deep down, which was why she gave the same attribute to actors with completely different styles. The lights in the theater went off, and after the silent subtitles, the most unique feature of the movie appeared on screen. The white-haired old couple looked at the camera and recalled how they came together many years ago. Although the elderly couple in the camera were actors, the story they told was real material that the screenwriter, Nora Ephron, had obtained from interviewing real-life couples. Eric listened with great interest, but Elizabeth, who was beside him, was a little confused. "Eric, what's going on? Don't worry, take your time." As they spoke, the camera switched to the campus of the University of Chicago, where the young male and female protagonists, who were about to enter society, met for the first time. On the way to New York, they stuck to their own views on life and argued with each other all the way. No one could convince the other, and with their last trace of youthful frivolity, they finally parted on bad terms. 5 years later, they met again. The female lead had found her lover, and the male lead was about to get married. Perhaps they felt that their lives were about to be complete, and at times like this, a person was always the most peaceful and tolerant. Therefore, they tried to get in touch, thinking that maybe they could become friends. Another 5 years later, the male lead got divorced and the female lead broke up. Under the teasing of the god of fate, the two who had fallen to the ends of the earth met again and became true friends. At least, that was what they thought. This time, Flowing Time was not in a hurry to run away. Instead, they began to jog. As they spent more time together, they became good friends who could talk about anything. They even introduced their best friends to each other in an attempt to piece together 2 pairs of marriages. They succeeded, or at least, half of it. Their best friends successfully became a couple, got to know each other, fell in love, and were about to get married. While sending their blessings, the stubborn couple still insisted on their own insistence. They felt that since they wanted to be friends from the beginning, they should not destroy this relationship. Perhaps it was a coincidence, or perhaps it was just a matter of time. In any case, it was inevitable that they would sleep together. Although they woke up in the morning, they began to panic and worry, avoiding each other. On the lonely and noisy New Year's Eve, the male lead finally could not help but confess, and then kiss passionately in tears. The camera finally stopped on the classic sofa. The people sitting on it were no longer the white-haired old couple, but the married couple, who chattered endlessly. Of course, there was no lack of arguments. 12 years and 3 months later, their beautiful youth was burned away, and they had a new partner. The lights turned on, and everyone left. In the crowded crowd, the men and women who came to watch the movie seemed to have become Siamese twins. They stuck to each other and whispered as they walked out. There were even some men and women who stayed in their seats and kissed as if there was no one else around. Elizabeth was holding a bucket of popcorn that she had only eaten a few mouthfuls. She was bumped into by the passers-by a few times. Finally, she came to Eric's side and said, "This movie is not bad." "That's right. The director's scenes are all very good, especially the depiction of the seasons. The scene where Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan are in the woods can be said to be beautiful. The maple leaves fluttering in the wind are like the last moments of life's reincarnation, blooming magnificently without restraint. Oh, and the eyes. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but we can always see the clear and distinct eyes of the protagonists. You have to know that the saying that the eyes are the windows to the soul is not just a saying. Through these scenes, a lot of emotions can be unknowingly conveyed to the audience. Maybe I can use it more in my own movies in the future. When they walked out of the theater, the woman suddenly became very angry when she heard Eric talking about his analysis. She threw the bucket of popcorn she was holding into the trash can with all her might, making a loud thud. While attracting the attention of the passers-by, It also made Eric, who was still explaining, stop. Seeing the woman's action, Eric shrugged and did not continue. He would only be asking for a snub. After getting into the car and seeing the woman silently fasten her seatbelt, Eric confirmed and said, "You're going to Julia's place?" Elizabeth nodded and said, "It's still far from Julia's place. Why don't I drive to your place first? I'll drive back myself after you get off. Anyway, you definitely have more than one car, right? You can just change to another one to work tomorrow." "No problem." Eric calculated the distance and found that it was the most convenient way. He did not object and started the car. It took them more than 30 minutes to get to the entrance of Eric's mansion. The woman, who usually liked to chatter and ask questions, did not say a word. Then, "See you tomorrow?" Eric stopped the car and unfastened his seatbelt. "Humph." Elizabeth snorted and stared at Eric as if she wanted to use her eyes to sweep this hateful man away. The atmosphere was tense for a few seconds. Eric turned off the engine and all the lights. In the dark, he reached out and pinched the woman's sharp chin. "Okay, what do you think?" Follow the Chinese website, add a friend on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow the Dread WeChat public account now. Chapter 231. Eric watched as the girl escaped into the bathroom like a mermaid. He was about to follow her, but before he could do anything, Elizabeth walked out of the bathroom again, wrapped in a bathrobe. "Eric, I've thought about it. Although I haven't known you for long, I think you're a good man." Elizabeth pinched the collar of her bathrobe, looking a little nervous. Her body swayed uneasily, but her beautiful slender eyes stared at Eric. Hearing Elizabeth's words, Eric suddenly had a very bad feeling. Before he could react, the girl mustered up the courage to continue speaking. "Plus, last night, last night. I'm not such a loose woman, so. Elizabeth hesitated for a few seconds before finally making up her mind. She said word by word, "So, you have to marry me." After the girl said these words, she seemed to have used up all the energy in her body in an instant. Her whole body seemed to have shrunk. But her eyes were still staring at Eric, waiting for his answer. Eric was stiff like a sculpture for a few seconds before he said, "What the F***CK?" Then, in Julia's apartment, Elizabeth sat on the sofa and narrated the story with a depressed expression. Julia, who was sitting next to her, was listening with great interest. But after Elizabeth finished talking about how she forced Eric to marry her, she stopped. Julia couldn't help but ask, "Why did you stop?" And then Elizabeth shook her head, tugged at the belt of the white bathrobe and stammered, "Then he ran away." Julia didn't seem to understand and asked subconsciously, "What ran away?" Elizabeth made a gesture in the air with her right hand and said, "He put on his clothes in a few seconds, then opened the door and ran away. When I came back to my senses, I went downstairs and looked around his house, but I couldn't find him again." After she said this, the two girls looked at each other. Elizabeth bit her lips as if she didn't know what to do. On the other hand, Julia's cheeks puffed up. After a while, she finally couldn't help but pat the sofa and burst into laughter. "Ha ha, Eric is really a bastard. Ha ha, too hateful. He ran away, ha ha ha. Hey, don't laugh." Elizabeth, whose face was red from embarrassment, picked up a pillow from the sofa and threw it at Julia. "How can you gloat like that? Hey, stop laughing. If you laugh again, I'll cut ties with you." Julia put her hands on her waist and took a few deep breaths before she finally calmed down. Then, she thought of another matter. "Then when you called me this morning and said that you had already left Eric's house, you lied to me?" I didn't want to tell you. But, this matter is really... Aya, can you not dwell on these details?" Julia looked at Elizabeth, who was about to go crazy, and quickly comforted her. Okay, I won't ask. Then what happened next?" "What then? Didn't you think of smashing that guy's more valuable things to vent your anger?" For example, his leg, watch, or something like that. Julia felt that if a delicate lady like Elizabeth was treated like this by Eric, she would definitely be unable to resist doing something impulsively. "How can I be so childish?" Elizabeth immediately retorted, but in the face of Julia's questioning expression, Elizabeth lowered her head slightly and admitted, "Okay, I was really angry at first. Even if he didn't want to, he should have made it clear to me on the spot. Why did he run away without saying a word? So, in a moment of impulse, I planned to burn down his villa." Julia covered her mouth in surprise. "Isn't that a bit too much?" Ignoring Julia's surprise, Elizabeth continued, "I found a barrel of gasoline in the storeroom and poured it in his living room. I looked around, but I didn't find anything to start a fire. Later, I slowly calmed down, and then I came here." Although Elizabeth didn't light the fire in the end, Julia still shrunk her neck when she heard this. To be honest, sometimes she still had some resentment towards Eric, and once had some thoughts of teaching Eric a lesson. However, the most brutal method of teaching a lesson in her imagination had never reached the point of burning down a house. Elizabeth also noticed Julia's reaction and laughed dryly. "Then, what do we do now?" Julia thought for a moment and said, "This is a very good opportunity. If you ask him for the script again, he definitely won't refuse. If that's the case, then what kind of person am I?" Julia also knew that this proud girl would definitely not agree. She spread out her hands and said, "Then let's just pretend that nothing happened and do what we need to do." "But I don't even know how to face that bastard." "Then don't be his assistant. That way, you won't see him. There was a period of time when I... Ahem. Didn't you already apply for TG Films' license? Why don't we spend 1 or 2 million yuan to make a low-budget movie for fun? If we're going to do it, we have to do our best. How can we just play around?" Elizabeth said unhappily. The two girls were about to continue their discussion when Drew, who was carrying a pink sling bag, opened the door and walked in. When he saw the two girls sitting on the sofa, he greeted them. "Good morning." Liz, why are you wearing a bath towel?" "I just took a shower," Elizabeth replied calmly. "Women were born with a talent for lying." "Oh." The little girl just nodded and didn't say anything else. Her attention wasn't on this. Otherwise, as long as she looked carefully, she would definitely be able to recognize the bathrobe. After all, she was responsible for buying Eric's household items. Drew sat down on the sofa and unzipped his bag. He took out a script and handed it to Julia and Elizabeth. "Look, what do you think of this script?" The two girls took the script together and looked at the title. Julia asked, "The Silence of the Lambs, what does it mean?" "I think I've heard of it somewhere." "It seems to be a novel," Elizabeth replied. And, as there was only one copy, the two girls read it together. While Julia and Elizabeth were reading the script, Drew poured himself a glass of juice and sat down on the sofa. He then said, "This script is based on the novel of the same name by Thomas Harris. Gene Hackman, the male lead of Mississippi is Burning, which was nominated for Best Movie last year, bought the rights to this script and planned to direct it himself. But that poor guy had severe bipolar disorder because of filming Mississippi is Burning. The psychiatrist advised him not to touch violent themes, so he had to give up this script. Coincidentally, I've been buying scripts recently. I think this story is very exciting and not too expensive, so I bought it." Julia, who only read half of the script, raised her head and said tentatively, "Drew, the main character of this script is a female. You're not thinking of... Julia, don't you want to break through again? Playing the role of Clarice, the female lead with a complicated personality in the script, will definitely hone your acting skills." Julia quickly shook her head. She felt that Shelby's role in Steel Magnolias was already a form of training. "No, I only read part of the story, and I already felt my hair stand on end. Who knows, after acting this story, even if I'm not sick, I'll be so scared that I'll have some mental illness." In the end, the girl seemed to have thought of something. Her face turned slightly red and she lowered her head subtly. At this time, Elizabeth, who had roughly browsed through the story, also raised her head. "Drew, I also don't think it's possible. This is a horror script that will definitely be rated as an R-rated horror film. Maybe after filming it, it will cause controversy. If that's the case, it will have a great impact on the image of our film company. After all, TG Film was started by the three of us girls. My thoughts are exactly the opposite of yours, Liz. After hearing Elizabeth's words, the little girl immediately retorted. It's precisely because TG is a company started by the three of us that I think we should try some more unusual film themes. This way, people won't think that the three of us are playing around. Hearing this, Elizabeth and Julia looked at each other. Julia immediately shrunk her neck and said, "I'm not acting in it. And my agent definitely won't agree. My image is mainly focused on romantic romance films. I heard that the screenwriter who changed the script wants Jodie Foster to play the role of Clarice." "Julia, don't you want to compete with Jodie Foster?" "Compete with what?" Julia blinked and said with a little pride in her tone, "If we're comparing salaries, although Jodie has won an Oscar, the box office of all the movies she has acted in since her debut can't compare to my Pretty Woman." "But, as an actress, don't you want to be recognized by an Oscar?" "No," Julia said with her chin slightly raised. The girl had only been famous for less than a year, so she hadn't experienced the influence of an Oscar. She was speaking the truth at this time. Although the girl was younger than Julia, her seniority in Hollywood was several generations higher than the girl. When she heard the girl say this, the girl showed an expression of disappointment. "If Eric heard what you just said, he would definitely regret letting you act in Pretty Woman." "You really let my Eric down." "Why should I not let that bastard down?" Julia retorted lightly, but her tone was obviously a little guilty that was difficult to hide. Drew said threateningly, "Do you dare to say what you just said in front of Eric again?" Julia immediately turned her head and looked to the side, pretending to not argue with a kid like him. Chapter 232. Okay, stop arguing. Elizabeth thought for a moment and said, "I think maybe we can give it a try." The girl immediately said, "This is the script chosen by the actor who was nominated for the Best Picture last year. It definitely won't be bad. If you guys agree, I'll ask Eric to take a look." When Julia heard Drew say this, she immediately suggested, "Drew, didn't Eric ask you to buy a lot of adaptation rights? Why don't you take one out for us to use? Since he chose those, they must be much better than this one, right?" "No." The girl immediately shook her head. "Those rights belong to my Flower Pictures. Don't you have a share in TG?" Julia was dissatisfied. Drew said, "Of course it's different. Eric gave Flower Pictures to me." Julia was stunned. She was a little envious, but she didn't know how to refute. "Okay, Julia, I think it's settled. Our first work will be The Silence of the Lambs." Julia hugged a pillow and curled up on the sofa. She shook her head and said, "I'm not playing the female lead." Elizabeth and Drew looked at each other. Elizabeth said, "Then, in that case, let's vote. Those who agree with Julia playing the female lead, raise your hand." The girl and Elizabeth immediately raised their right hand. "You guys." Julia rolled her eyes speechlessly. Elizabeth looked at Julia's disagreeing face and said, "All right, if you don't agree, Drew and I will find someone else to convince you." Julia immediately thought of Eric's hateful face. She jumped up and threw the pillow away. She said angrily, "You guys, how can you bully me like this?" "So, you agree?" Elizabeth smiled. Julia's face fell. "I have to ask my agent first." Elizabeth said, "The role of Clarice is neither a villain nor a clown. I think Mr. Sid will definitely agree to it. Besides, don't think that we don't know that when a Hollywood star reaches your level, the agent only has the right to make suggestions. It's no longer possible to control the choice of your script. You're clearly trying to shirk your responsibility. Why bother asking the agent? I think that guy has better foresight. We can ask him." All right, I agree. I agree, okay?" Julia finally gave in completely. If that's the case, I'll go back tonight and ask Eric to read the script for us. Drew smiled triumphantly. He was about to put the script away when Elizabeth suddenly reached out and stopped him. Let me do it. I will be participating in the shooting of Sleepless in Seattle during this time, so I will have more time to ask him for advice.
You?
Drew glanced at Elizabeth in confusion. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the girl was a little guilty. I remember you saying that Eric doesn't agree to help you choose the script? Elizabeth quickly said, haven't we already decided? Also, Julia will definitely use her salary to invest, so I don't think the investment for such a movie will be too much. It won't be a big deal even if it loses money. In that case, I'll just take it and ask him for advice. I don't think Eric will be that stingy. Also, if you show it to him, you'll have to find another reason. If you're not careful, Eric might find out that you're involved in our film company. Drew thought for a moment and nodded. That's good too. Otherwise, Eric will accuse me of skipping class again if I run back. Elizabeth heaved a sigh of relief. It would be terrible if the girl returned to find the villa covered in gasoline and any clues related to her. Elizabeth wasn't worried about Drew's reaction after finding out. She just didn't want more people to know about this embarrassing incident. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't return home last night, she definitely wouldn't have been able to hide this from Julia, and Elizabeth wouldn't have revealed what had happened to Julia. After settling this matter, the girl looked at Elizabeth's bathrobe and got excited. She stood up and took off her t-shirt. She said, in that case, I'll take a shower too. Sigh, it would be great if I could rent another house. The school dormitory isn't very comfortable. Julia, why don't you move to a bigger villa? You can afford it anyway. No, I think it's too big. You won't be staying here for long. This is just right. Julia immediately shook her head. The girl shrugged and didn't say anything else as she walked away. After the bathroom door closed, Julia asked in a low voice, Hey, Liz, are you still going to Eric's place? What else can I do? Elizabeth picked up the script and waved it. I can't let Drew return and find the villa covered in gasoline, right? Besides, that bastard should be the one feeling guilty about this matter. Didn't he want to escape? I'm going to stick close to that guy and make him restless all the time. Julia thought of how Eric might feel uneasy in front of Elizabeth and couldn't help but praise her. Liz, you're really vicious. The girl shamelessly flicked the short hair in front of her forehead. Of course. Although she said that, it wasn't until the next afternoon that Elizabeth dawdled to Firefly's office again. The employees of Firefly all knew that the girl was Eric's new assistant and had a special relationship with Eric, so Elizabeth arrived at the door of Eric's office without any hindrance. After hesitating for a moment, the girl raised her hand to knock on the door, but after thinking about it, she gently turned the door lock and tiptoed in. Jeffrey, I've seen the set photos. There's no problem with the indoor setting, but Jonah's room is missing an egg-shaped space chair. You can just tell the prop master the name. Okay, I'll draw a sketch and send it over later. There's no problem indoors, but I feel that the outside of the wooden house is a little empty. A chair under the eaves of the corridor will give people a feeling of loneliness. Also, put a few large flower pots there. Oh, it's best if they're made of wood, I want. As Eric was speaking, he seemed to feel a shadow flash past in his peripheral vision. He subconsciously raised his head, and when he saw clearly who it was, his hand trembled, and the microphone fell to the ground with a clatter. Elizabeth, who was originally a little nervous, felt relieved when she saw Eric's stunned expression. She pulled a chair over and sat down elegantly in front of Eric. Seeing that Eric subconsciously looked around, the girl asked smugly, What, are you going to escape through the window behind you this time? Although this building isn't too high, if you fall, you'll at least suffer a comminuted fracture, right? Eric smiled and bent down to pick up the phone. Jeffrey, it's nothing. I accidentally dropped the phone. Well, it's like this. I have some urgent matters to attend to. I'll call you back later, okay? That's all for now. After hanging up the phone, Eric didn't know what to say for a moment. Originally, Eric thought that the incident 2 nights ago was just an ordinary, party. He didn't expect the girl to get married in the blink of an eye. Just thinking about it made him feel scared. Although he had already experienced everything in his previous life, in this life, he wasn't even 20 years old. How could he encircle himself in the siege of marriage so early? Although the Westerners in the movies and TV series all looked bold and unrestrained, if you looked carefully, you would find that in mainstream movies and TV series, the men and women who often hugged each other were basically unmarried. In other words, although Westerners were very open before marriage, after marriage, whether it was the social atmosphere or public opinion, the requirements for the fidelity of the married couple were very strict. If he was single, even if he maintained a relationship with a bunch of women, he would only receive some ridicule at most. No one could do anything to him. But if he dared to do this after marriage, he would be met with the condemnation of all public opinion. As a person who aspired to be a playboy, Eric certainly didn't want to go against the public opinion of the entire society. That would be very stupid. Therefore, he didn't have any thoughts of getting married at all. That was why he directly ran away yesterday morning. Although it was a bit too much, he didn't have any good way to deal with a woman who was already at a dead end because of a certain idea. "Why aren't you saying anything?" The girl looked at Eric's guilty look and suddenly became more arrogant. "What should I say?" Eric smiled awkwardly. "I can't thank you for not burning down my villa yesterday, right?" "Why," Lisbeth said hatefully, "Humph, I just couldn't find the lighter." "You got lucky." Although she pushed Eric to the corner, why Lisbeth didn't want to chase after him. After all, she didn't want to keep talking about this topic. "What were you doing just now?" Keenly aware that the girl was about to change the topic, Eric quickly said, "Nothing, I was communicating with Jeffrey about the set of Sleepless in Seattle. Because I have too many things to do, I can only leave these things to Jeffrey. He is now in Seattle making the final arrangements." "Oh," the girl nodded. Do you still want to continue to be my assistant?" Eric asked tentatively. "Why not?" Why Lisbeth's tone immediately rose. "And you bastard, don't ever think about that again." "Of course," Eric quickly nodded. For a woman who wanted to force him to marry when he woke up, Eric would rather not touch her for the rest of his life. "I'm here today because I need your help with something," the girl said. She lowered her head and took out the script of Silence of the Lambs from her bag. "Here, give me some advice. I've already decided to make this movie next year, so you don't have to evaluate the box office prospects of this script. You don't have to be responsible for the profits and losses. You just have to give me some guidance." Eric took the script and was about to tell the girl to read it when he had time. He inadvertently glanced at the name on the cover and his eyes suddenly widened. Chapter 233. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind I Am Hollywood and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type dread, and tell me secretly. "Why, is there a problem?" Seeing Eric's surprised look, Elizabeth leaned over and looked at the cover. She didn't find anything special, so she asked again, "What's wrong?" Nothing." Eric shook his head, opened the script directly, and quickly read it. After more than 10 minutes, Eric finished reading the script, looked up and asked, "Where did you get this script?" Of course, Elizabeth wouldn't tell Eric that the script was found by Drew. She just told Eric what Drew said. The little girl repeatedly asked her and Julia to keep it a secret. She wanted to secretly make some achievements and give Eric a big surprise in the future. When Eric heard that Elizabeth accidentally got the script, he could only shake his head with emotion. If he knew that this script was found by the little girl, he would definitely give this prodigal little girl a good beating. How could she share such a good thing with others, and so much at that? "You finished reading it, what do you think?" Elizabeth asked nervously. Although she had decided to make this movie, it was impossible for her not to get some affirmation from Eric. Eric stroked the cover of the script. For a moment, he had the idea of at least sharing the investment of this script with Elizabeth. After all, this was not only a blockbuster movie, but also a rare excellent film that won the 4 most important Oscars. But as soon as this idea surfaced, it was secretly suppressed by him. He felt that there was no need to take all the benefits in the world. If he didn't give others a way out, it would only lead to him having no way out. What's more, the little girl in front of him had just had a relationship that was beyond friendship. After thinking this through, Eric said in a relaxed tone, "The story is not too special, but it will definitely give people a different feeling when it is made into a movie. So I think the casting of this movie is very important. Do you have a candidate in mind for the male and female lead? I'm going to cast Julia as Clarice Starling, and she's agreed to it. There are no other candidates yet. Anyway, this is my first work as a producer. Everything can be done slowly. I'm not in a hurry." Eric immediately shook his head. "No, Julia is not suitable to play Clarice. Clarice is a very complicated character. Julia's acting skills are not up to that level. Then who do you think is suitable?" The girl asked tentatively. Eric blurted out, "Jodie Foster." "Ah, what a coincidence. I just heard that the screenwriter who adapted the script also suggested Jodie Foster to play Clarice." Elizabeth sighed in surprise, and then said in what she thought was a very professional tone, "However, Eric, this is just a horror film. The audience wants to watch a horror film with heartbeat and excitement, so I don't think it needs the female lead to be too good at acting. Horror films don't expect to compete for an Oscar. I haven't heard of many horror films winning an Oscar." "There haven't been before, but that doesn't mean there won't be in the future," Eric said. "Of course, I'm just suggesting. It's up to you to take it or not." Since this film had nothing to do with him, Eric did not want to forcibly intervene. The history of Hollywood had been completely changed with his participation. Even without the classic The Silence of the Lambs, there might be other great movies that would emerge. "Then I'll go back and think about it." Hearing Eric's words, the girl nodded cautiously and asked, "Is there anything else?" "Professor Hannibal, you can ask Anthony Hopkins to give it a try." Anthony Hopkins. Elizabeth repeated the name Eric mentioned. It was no wonder that the girl had not heard of Anthony Hopkins. Although the famous Professor Hannibal had made his debut in the 60s, in the parallel universe, he did not reach the peak of his career until the success of The Silence of the Lambs. At that time, Hopkins was already in his 50s. Before The Silence of the Lambs, Hopkins did not even have a single representative work. Eric did not know how to explain to the girl why he knew this person, so he could only vaguely say, "He's a veteran actor in Hollywood. He has acted in many literary films, so his acting skills are definitely not a problem. I don't remember which movie I saw him in, but his image is very compatible with Professor Hannibal. You can ask someone to find him." "Well, then I'll write it down." The girl nodded, took out the address book in her satchel, and carefully wrote down the name. Eric looked at the girl's serious expression as she wrote with her head down and said, "You know Jonathan Demme, right? He's the one who directed the script for Scary Island that I wrote previously. He's quite capable, and he'll definitely gain quite a bit of fame after Home Alone, so I'll let him direct The Silence of the Lambs. However, Jonah is still in Venice. When he returns, I'll introduce you to him." The girl's hand paused for a moment, then she raised her head and stared at Eric. "I don't need you to compensate me." Eric was stunned for a moment, then understood something. He smiled and said, "You're too sensitive. I've never thought of compensating you. You can treat this as a business deal. Jonathan Demme has signed a contract with UTA, so UTA will take a cut of his director's salary. I happen to be a major shareholder of UTA." Why, Lisbeth pursed her lips and said, "Then I'll talk to Jonathan Demme myself. You don't have to interfere, and I don't need any discounts. I'll pay him whatever he deserves." Eric shrugged. "Okay, do as you wish." After discussing this matter, Lisbeth put the script in her satchel, then looked up and asked, "Then, is there anything I can do now?" Eric gathered a few documents on the desk and handed them to the girl. "Take these out and crush them with a shredder, then throw them away. Also, The one on top is the filming schedule for Sleepless in Seattle. You can familiarize yourself with it first, so you won't be in the dark when filming starts. There's a desk in the lounge outside. You can stay there, and I'll call you if there's anything. Okay. The woman nodded. She was very satisfied with Eric's attitude of finally letting her do something serious. She stood up with a few documents and was about to leave when she suddenly stopped and asked, "Eric, it seems that you only have one assistant, Ellen. You don't have a female secretary?" "Because I rarely stayed in the company in the past, so I didn't need one. However, after this year, there will definitely be more things that the company needs me to deal with personally, so I'll definitely find a beautiful vase to deal with the miscellaneous stuff." At this point, Eric winked at the girl ambiguously. "Why, do you have anyone to recommend? Or do you want to recommend yourself?" "Humph, you can't afford to use me, and I'm not a vase," the girl said proudly, then turned and walked out. What a good activity for a free lunch. Cool phones waiting for you. Follow the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Dread, and participate now. Everyone has a prize. Follow the official account Dread on WeChat right now. Chapter 234. On September 15th, the 46th Venice Film Festival came to an end. Although the Venice Film Festival had repeatedly flaunted its artistic nature to distinguish between the increasingly commercial Cannes Film Festival and the Berlin Film Festival, after a series of media promotions, Island Horror, which had been firmly labeled as an anti-war film, finally won the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival in the current turbulent world situation. After the award results were released, after Disney spared no effort in promoting it, the fame of Island Horror undoubtedly overshadowed City of Sadness, which won the Golden Lion. Of course, most people admitted that City of Sadness, a movie that depicted the joys and sorrows of small characters in the background of a big time, was far more artistic than Island Horror, and had a stronger humanistic atmosphere. But after all, this was a profit-driven world. Although City of Sadness won the highest honor, as an artistic film, it was destined to not have much commercial success. Although Island Horror won the Silver Lion at Venice, through the screening in Venice, as long as there was no problem with their eyesight, distributors all over the world knew that it was a commercial film, and a commercial film with a very exciting plot and box office potential. Therefore, when Island Horror won the Silver Lion at Venice, producers from all over the world, who had already begun to negotiate with Disney for distribution, swarmed in. On the day the award results were released, Disney successfully sold the distribution rights in 12 countries around the world, and at the same time, there were more countries and regions in negotiations. Of course, Disney certainly did not forget to promote it in the United States. Although with the rise of Hollywood and the decline of European films, the influence of the three major film festivals in North America was getting lower and lower. But if a Hollywood film could win an award abroad, it was definitely something that Americans would be proud of. After being bombarded by the newspapers and media, the fame of terror on a small island was soon known by everyone. Then, Disney announced the movie's release date. It was November 1st, Halloween. Although this was not the most popular schedule, and some people even proposed to put Island Horror in next year's summer, after communicating with Eric, Michael Eisner decided to put Island Horror in the schedule that many people were not optimistic about. In fact, the reason why Eric made this suggestion was his own consideration. Island Horror was not the kind of traditional Western horror film that relied on blood and violence to attract audiences to the cinema. It focused on psychological suspense and plot, and with its PG-13 rating, it would not prevent the whole family from going to the cinema during the new year, so it was not a problem to put it in the New Year schedule. What's more, who said that a horror film was not suitable for the new year? Eric remembered very clearly that the famous Scream in his previous life was released during the Christmas period, and it earned more than $100 million at the box office with a cost of more than $10 million. That was an R-rated horror film that relied on violence and blood as its selling point. Poor someone was even killed in the first few minutes. In early September, most of the crew of Sleepless in Seattle had rushed to Seattle in advance to prepare for the film's preliminary work. It was not until September 16 that Eric completely dealt with the recent complicated affairs of Firefly and was ready to leave for Seattle to start shooting the film. Sleepless in Seattle and Home Alone 2 would be produced consecutively. Therefore, after shooting Hank's scenes in Seattle, Eric would rush to New York to shoot Nicole's main scenes. Sleepless in Seattle was finished, followed by Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Since this sequel was a great success in his previous life, Eric did not plan to change the script. Although time was tight, Eric, who was used to this kind of shooting rhythm, did not feel too much pressure. He just felt more uncomfortable now. The location was in the lobby of the Los Angeles airport. In addition to some of the staff who were going to follow Eric to Seattle, there were also a few women around him. On one side were Drew, Elizabeth, and Julia, and on the other side stood Jennifer Aniston and Nicole. Not far away, flashes lit up from time to time. In addition to the paparazzi who were stopped by the airport security several times, even the onlooking tourists raised their cameras and joined in. After all, among these women, except for Elizabeth, the other 4 women were all famous actresses. Although Eric had been trying to reduce his exposure, trying to work in the direction of some kind of behind-the-scenes mastermind, his fame was getting bigger and bigger. The media never stopped paying attention to him, so it was impossible for the passengers in the airport not to know him. It could be imagined that tomorrow's newspapers would definitely have headlines like, "The Playboy Crew Set Off, Surrounded by 5 Beauties, Sweet Send-Off." Of course, there was definitely no sweetness. If eyes had a physical form, he would have been pierced by all kinds of sharp weapons and could be directly on the barbecue grill. Look at these women. Although they were all beautifully dressed, their eyes and expressions were mischievous. Jennifer Aniston was full of resentment. Nicole's teasing in her heart overflowed. Elizabeth, if you don't care, then go ahead and act until the end. Why are you stepping on your feet? Don't you know you're wearing high heels? And Julia, what kind of expression is that? Sometimes it's helpless, sometimes it's resentful, and sometimes it's sad. She just showed an indifferent expression, and then it's a little sad. Is she trying to show that her acting skills are the best in this group? Although they were here to see him off, the women seemed to have discussed it and ignored him. They separated into 2 groups and chatted among themselves. Eric could understand Nicole and Jennifer Aniston. During this period of time, the newspapers had been hyping the relationship between the 2 of them. The 2 of them went shopping together, had dinner together, and a lot of photos of Nicole visiting the set of Friends were taken. Many newspapers credited Nicole with getting the female lead role in Sleepless in Seattle, to Jennifer Aniston's recommendation to her boyfriend. Nicole cleverly didn't refute this. Of course, Eric was happy to see this. After all, out of all the female leads in the movies that he was involved in, Eric and Nicole were the most innocent, due to the fact that Nicole had concealed her experience as a maid very well. It was probably because of this that Jennifer Aniston became good friends with Nicole. Eric even felt that Jennifer Aniston must have done this to prevent him from stealing her star. But Eric was a little confused about the other 3 women. They seemed to be very familiar with each other. He knew Elizabeth and Julia, but what about the little girl? Finally, after half an hour of suffering, the airport announcer's incomparably pleasant voice sounded. They could board the plane now. Eric couldn't be bothered to say anything else. He couldn't wait to board the plane. Chapter 235. After saying goodbye to Jennifer Aniston and the others, Eric took Nicole, Elizabeth, and several other staff members to the boarding gate. The huge Boeing plane glided through the long distance and rushed into the sky. After the plane stabilized, Eric unfastened his seat belt and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Elizabeth, who had been intentionally or unintentionally glancing at Eric, snorted at this time. "This is the fate of a greedy man, humph." Eric did not want to discuss this with Elizabeth. This girl was obviously jealous, so no matter what he said, it was tantamount to provoking her. Silence was the best way to deal with it. After a 4-hour flight, the plane arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Looking out through the window, the runway was wet and the sky was gloomy. It had obviously just rained. Compared to Los Angeles, which had more than 300 days of sunshine every year, the weather in Seattle was simply the other extreme. Because of the temperate oceanic climate, Seattle maintained a state of high humidity all year round. Even when it was not raining, it always gave people a feeling of humidity. It was said that the line in the original film, "It rains in Seattle for 9 months every year," was the complaint of the director, Nora Ephron, because she always encountered rainy days during the shooting process and delayed the shooting process. Under the careful guidance of the stewardess, Eric and the others put on a coat before getting off the plane. However, just as they walked out of the airport, they were greeted by a chill. The temperature in Los Angeles could occasionally reach 30 degrees in September, but it was already autumn in Seattle, and the temperature was only about 15 degrees. "Hi, Eric." After Jeffrey, who came to pick up Eric, saw him, he stepped forward and hugged him. After Eric greeted him, he let go of Jeffrey and asked, "How do you feel in Seattle recently?" "It's terrible. I don't like the weather here very much." Jeffrey shook his head. Eric smiled and comforted him. "Bear with it for a few more days. When I get on track here, you can go to New York." "I know. Let's go." "The car is outside," Jeffrey said. He greeted the others and led them out of the airport and into several commercial vehicles. After half an hour of travel, they finally arrived at the filming location in Seattle, Alki Beach. This beach was located in the southwest of Seattle, and it was about 20 kilometers away from the city center. Because it was relatively remote, the living environment of the crew was quite simple. Elizabeth stood in her room, looking in horror at the simple furniture in front of her, as well as the old-fashioned television that looked like a small box. She complained to Eric, who she had dragged over, "Eric, is the crew's budget this tight?" "Of course not." Eric found the girl's expression very interesting and joked, "But it's not to the extent of building a 5-star hotel here for the crew." "But The girl pointed at everything in the room with a look of disgust. "Liz, you have to understand that we're here to make a movie, not to enjoy ourselves. In order to save time, we have to choose a place to live nearby. We can't have dozens of people drive more than 20 kilometers from the city to live here every day, right? This area is a residential area within a few kilometers. You should be able to imagine how much traffic it will cause and how much time it will take for people to drive to the city to work every day." Elizabeth frowned and said, "But it looks so dirty here." "If you can't stand it, then go to the city and live in a hotel. The conditions of this hotel are not bad. You see, there's a TV." Eric smiled and pointed at the old TV with a wooden shell that looked like a small box. He wondered if he should take one away. This thing would become an antique after more than 10 years. If he put it in the house, it might give people a feeling of postmodernism. Elizabeth rolled her eyes and gave Eric a, "Are you kidding me?" look. After joking, Eric patted the girl on the shoulder and said, "Liz, don't you want to be a producer? If you can't even stand this, I advise you to give up as soon as possible. When you make movies in the future, you will often encounter filming conditions worse than here. Sleeping in the wild is inevitable. What will you do then?" The girl bit her lower lip and could not help but ask, "Well, does everyone in the crew live in a place like this?" "Of course," Eric said. "I'm in the room diagonally across from you. Nicole is opposite you. Also, a hotel can't accommodate everyone. That's why I said this is the best one. The crew and prop master live across the street, and the conditions are even worse." Elizabeth pondered for a moment before silently turning around and dragging her suitcase in. After lunch, Eric spent the afternoon checking the locations that Jeffrey and the others had chosen. In the evening, the crew held a simple opening party. The next day, Sleepless in Seattle officially started shooting. "Hey, Victor, how are you getting along with Uncle Hanks these days?" When the crew was laying the camera track, Eric squatted next to a 7 or 8-year-old boy wearing a small red jacket and a baseball cap. The little boy named Victor Morris looked up at his mother, who was standing next to him. After receiving encouragement, he said, "Uncle Hanks is a very good person. He bought me a lot of gifts," the boy said as he took out a pocket-sized Transformers model from his pocket and waved it at Eric. It looked like Optimus Prime. Eric smiled and said, Well, if you do well later, I'll buy you a gift too. How about a full set of Transformers? The little boy looked at his mother again and shook his head. No, Mr. Director. Mom said you've already paid me, so even if there's no gift, I'll do my best. Eric patted the boy's head and chatted with him for a while before standing up and asking Hanks, "What do you think?" "Victor is very obedient and smart, but I don't know if he can perform as well as you want. To be honest, I think there's a boy who's most suitable for the role of Jonah." Eric knew that Hanks was referring to Stuart Runkle. But it was obviously not possible. Even as a supporting role, Stuart's salary was in the millions, and the little boy's salary was only $100,000. Firefly was not short of money, but it would not waste money like this. Jonah's role was also very good, but it was still a supporting role. Sam and Ann were always the main actors and actresses. "Just try a few more times. I chose this boy because he's very obedient. The shooting time of Seattle is not flexible. If we choose a disobedient actor, it might delay the shooting time, and that would be a disaster for the crew." "Haha, I understand." Hanks smiled. The shooting track was laid out quickly. Eric had a simple conversation with the two, and Hanks took the little boy to the beach. The first scene was very simple. It mainly consisted of Sam and Jonah rowing in the sea and frolicking by the beach. Because it was all long-distance shots, there were no acting requirements. Therefore, Hanks and the little guy could just do whatever they wanted. Eric gave a few instructions to the cameraman and assistant director, allowing them to shoot as much material as possible. Then, he walked to the nearby trailer. The door of the trailer was open, and Eric walked in directly. The makeup artist was touching up Nicole's makeup. After the scene of Hanks and the little girl playing with each other was finished, the actress would start her first scene. It was the scene where she watched the father and son play from afar. It was also the scene where Annie and Sam talked for the first time. Although in the movie, the main actors and actresses did not talk until an hour after the start of the movie, Eric planned to shoot this scene at the beginning. "Mr. Williams." Seeing Eric come in, the two female makeup artists immediately greeted him. "You can continue." Eric comforted Nicole, who was about to stand up, and walked behind the actress to look at the beautiful woman in the makeup mirror. After a while, the makeup artist skillfully cleaned Nicole's face with a makeup brush, and then said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, do you think this is okay?" Nicole also got up and stood in front of Eric, and then she turned around to show off. At this time, the actress was wearing a white suit and skirt, white high heels, and a wide gray windbreaker with a hood. It was exactly the same as Meg Ryan's outfit in his memory. However, although the two were equally beautiful, there was no connection in terms of temperament. Eric wanted a silly and sweet female lead. "Nicole, imagine that you are in Reed, and then smile for me." Eric leaned in front of a table and said to the actress. Nicole thought for a while, and after a while, she tilted her head slightly, opened her mouth, and looked at Eric foolishly. In an instant, a very silly and at the same time, sweet smell hit him in the face. Eric was surprised, and then he snapped his fingers in approval. "Very good, just like that." After Nicole received Eric's approval, she quickly changed her expression and changed back to the tall and cold Nicole Kidman. She looked at Eric and waited for his next order. Eric did not mind the change in the actress's expression, as long as Nicole could quickly change her state during the performance. "By the way, you should have figured out how one walks, right?" "Of course." Nicole nodded and looked around. She picked up a satchel and hung it on her shoulder, looking as if it would fall off at any time. Then, she walked lazily out of the trailer, which was completely different from her usual steps. "That's great." Eric praised again. Nicole's performance had far exceeded his expectations. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.